So I'm going to open it real quick and turn it over to.
Pardon?
I'm going to open it and turn it to overlap.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to the Community and Health Services Committee meeting for April the 4th. I'll invite Julie Hale to call a roll call.
Regional Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Craig. Present. Councillor Deutschmann.
Present.
Chair Erb.
Present.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hunick.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Liggett.
Present.
Councillor McCabe.
Present.
Councillor Nowak. Councillor Salonen.
Present.
Councillor Shantz. Councillor Verbanovic.
Present.
Councillor Williams.
Present.
Councillor Wolf.
Present.
Thank you. As we begin this meeting, we're again reminded that many of our homes and places of employment are situated on the land that is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Nabashabi and neutral people. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection to Waterloo region, and we also recognize the contributions Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this community. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work here and reaffirm our collective commitment to keep the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real and intentional in our region. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act?
Mr. Chair?
Councillor Deutschmann.
Yeah, I just want to declare a conflict of interest in 7.1.2. My spouse owns a corporation that is part owner of a property in North Dumfries Township that has a daycare operator as the tenant.
Thank you. That'll be noted by the clerk's department. We received a delegation that you received on the agenda item. The delegation is registered to speak about the report listed under 7.111, and perhaps to provide some context for the report before we hear the delegation, I'm going to invite Mr. Regier and Ms. Shamira Russell to highlight the report.
Thank you, Chair Erb. This report pertains to the Key Cultural Institutions Grants Program, which has been operating since, in this current format, since about 2017. Helen Shamiri Russell is our Director of Cultural Services and has been shepherding this program just about since that time. And I'd like to invite her to make some comments about how the program operates and how it's structured and how we came to the conclusions that you'll see before you today.
Thank you. And so through the chair, this is a report for the 2023 allocation to the Key Cultural Institution Grant Program. As Commissioner Regier mentioned, this program has been operating since 2017. In 2015, Council actually gave staff direction to create the program. The way that it's currently structured, there are 4 organizations that are eligible to apply to that program based on the eligibility criteria that are in that program, 2 of which we don't currently fund. That is the 2 art galleries. Back in 2000, Council had made a decision that art galleries were an area of municipal responsibility. So it's just the museum and the symphony that we fund. So based on the grant program budget allocation that Council made last month, this is now the grant allocation recommendations coming to Council for approval for 2023 expenditure.
Any questions of staff for clarification? Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, Councillor Hunick.
Through you, Chair Erb. I'm just wondering, I saw the report and I saw the criteria for funding, but I'm noticing that both of the key cultural institutions are located in Kitchener that were proposed to fund. And so, should we be looking at any key cultural institutions either in the townships, in Cambridge, or in Waterloo?
So through the chair, I can certainly respond to that. The way that the program is currently designed and the eligibility criteria that were set out, mainly the organizations that we currently capture mostly are around the type of operations that they do, so the scale and size of the programming, relationship to municipally owned buildings that are structured for cultural activity. There's actually a budgetary limit, so we're looking at organizations with an operating budget of about $1 million. And there's another one that I can't remember off the top of my head, and I apologize. So currently, yes, those are the organizations that we capture, and council is more than welcome to direct staff to have a look at those grant guidelines and the eligibility criteria that we've defined so that we can expand those to include other organizations if that's the case. There certainly isn't a geographic parameter that exists in the grant program.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that no one's being excluded. Thanks.
Councillor Craig.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Got a lot of paraphernalia on here today. I know it's easy to.
Through you to our staff person, I'm a little fascinated by what's happening here. They got 4 organizations that you've listed that fall into this category. They're all in KW. There's nothing in Cambridge at all. Is there anything in Cambridge that might or hopefully should be in that category?
So through the chair, yes, but not currently with the way that we've described the eligibility criteria. We look at something like the Fashion History Museum in Cambridge, which is very close to meeting the various criteria, right? So the professional standards of production, of cultural activity. They're currently in a municipally owned building. The stumbling block at the moment with that one is that $1 million operating budget. They sort of sit more close to the sort of $650,000 mark. So if we wanted to include that organization or others like it in this grant program, we'd have to adjust the eligibility criteria, particularly in this case, the one that looks at their budgetary size.
What about Drayton Theatre?
That's a good question, and I'd have to look into that one. That's, I think, an organization that has not tended to apply. So I'll look into whether to see whether, and I think maybe the other sticking point is that the buildings in which they do their operations are not municipally owned, as far as I understand. All of them are?
Well, the theater is, yes.
Right, so I'll look into that to see if there's if they should be applying to that grant program. Absolutely, I can look into that.
All right, thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Erb. Councillor Craig sort of started where I was going to go with this, and that's the fact that one of the reasons that we looked at how we fund cultural institutions and organizations within the community was to allow for new entrants and also to take the politics out of it. And I think some of the delegations that we've seen previously, and I can't speak for the one today, but it might be an issue of timing. But my recollection was that the certainty of the streams of funding was that council would then express itself on those, and then staff would go away and use that criteria established by council in order to take the politics out of how the grants were done, and again, allow for new entrants. And I'm just wondering if that recollection is correct, or if you want to make any comments on the process as well as the timing as we go forward.
Sure, so through the chair, I think absolutely, particularly looking back to the grants administration policy that council passed last August, that certainly is the approach that we're encouraging and council has agreed to be taking, which is to look at allocating grant funding through approved grant programs, which then allows council to have a far more objective approach to grant funding, also ensuring that organizations who are eligible have an opportunity to apply. So it's trying to build that transparency and allowing council to work with grant policies and grant guidelines in order to make the changes that they want, which then allows council to engage with our community and support the community through a systematic way.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you tell me, was the Fashion History Museum considered in this funding?
So through the chair, not in this current round with the way that the guidelines are currently structured. Because they don't meet the eligibility criteria around their budgetary size, no, they're not currently considered. Council can certainly request in future that we revisit those guidelines and those parameters, but at the moment, they're not eligible to apply for this particular grant program.
Okay, I'd like that considered going forward. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you. So we have one delegate registered. Sorry. Oh, Councillor Craig, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, as we go forward, if we cannot start looking at the eligibility criteria for this particular program. Because a lot of, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the smaller cultural institutions we have can't compete within the guidelines that have been established. And I think we have to relook at it and help some of these other organizations that are on the periphery. And I think to show a more expansive viewpoint in terms of the region with regards to different cultural events that are happening in different parts of the region. And I think that's important too. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hoping we can do that this year before the next set of grants come up. So it's a request directly or indirectly, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I have Councillor Verbanovic next.
Well, thank you very much, and I certainly, at the appropriate time can support the kind of request that Councillor Craig and others have referenced. I do believe, Mr. Chair, we're going to be hearing from a delegation from one of those groups as soon as we get to delegations, and that's former Chair Sealing with respect to the Grand Philharmonic Choir. This is a group that has a very rich and long history in our community. In fact, I think we recently hosted them at the museum at the regional museum for their anniversary event. And they're certainly experiencing some of their own frustrations with the process. I'll let Mr. Sealing speak to that. But this was a concern that certainly was flagged at budget time, and we're hearing it again around the regional council horseshoe today. And I do think that we need to keep in mind that when we were looking at ways of supporting groups that historically have not been supported and sectors of our community that haven't been supported, I think I and everyone else was very supportive of that, and it's the right thing to do. But I think we need to remember what we're trying to do is add to the vitality of our region, and not do so by taking away from others that have been an important part of our vitality, because I think that will not achieve the kind of aspirations I think that we have when we talk about a world-class region.
Councillor Shantz, I think you wanted to make a comment related to. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps a question with it too. In terms of the Philharmonic that Councillor Verbanovic was just talking about, I know for certain that there are folks in the township who take a leadership role at the Philharmonic. So I would say that institution in particular is very pan-regional. It's across the region. So I guess my question to staff would be, this is one stream of funding. Where would the Philharmonic, if not here, where else would an organization like the Philharmonic go for funding from the region?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, we are currently working on another grant program for cultural organizations. It'll be coming to council next month. So in May, the plan is that we look at the guidelines in May, hopefully have a deadline for applications in June with us to be able to allocate funding into the community in July. We're working really hard to ensure that that grant program can capture a variety of things. The plan is that it's funded through municipal accommodation tax, so that's one piece of it. Also, last December, council directed staff to ensure that former recipients of operating grant funding who don't currently exist within a grant program not be precluded from applying. So that would be the Grand Philharmonic Choir will be one of those who has been existing outside of a program since 2012. The Oktoberfest, which has been existing outside of a formal program since 2016, as well as the Highland Games. So that is currently being constructed and will be coming to council, next month.
So just so, for my own, Councillor Foxton and Councillor Shantz, you're still not connected to eScribe, is that right? So I'm sorry, well, I apologize for missing you then. I didn't realize that. I think Councillor McCabe had her button pressed next, and then I think you're next, if that's okay.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. A question to Councillor Craig or to staff. Just on Councillor Craig's comments about, I just wondered if that staff direction is enough, or if we need to pass a motion to come back with some expanded criteria. Because I'm certainly interested in looking at potentially changing that policy. So I just wanted to confirm if we needed a motion to do that or if the staff direction is enough.
I was going to ask for direction on that when we were done with the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. So the township has a granting program, just like everybody else. But we also have programs, financial money, to institutional type programs that are the core of our community. And so instead of giving them grants, we have memos of understanding to those organizations. And they are funded each year, and they must report back to us at the end of the year that they used the funds in an appropriate manner whatsoever and were successful in this, that, and the other thing. We did not lump all our grants into one type of program because some grants are more fluid, and then some are core grants for the organization and the running of your municipality. So I would suggest that the region consider looking at memo of understandings with core organizations that are sort of the foundations of the community. And I totally agree with Councillor McCabe in that it should be a motion. If we leave it to staff and it gets on the staff list, sometimes things just get. So I'd like the idea of a motion, if Councillor Craig is willing.
I'd like to deal with the rest of the questions before we get to that point, please. Councillor Deutschmann.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Erb. So I'm just trying to understand, Councillor Urbanovic's questions raised a question in my mind. I know the Philharmonic had come to us requesting, and I thought it was like, maybe, what was the amount? I thought it was about $30,000. And did we address that issue? I didn't see them referenced in this report. I thought maybe this was some other funding. Or could I get just some clarification on that, please?
Shamira Russell.
Absolutely. So through the chair, this is not the grant program that the Grand Philharmonic Choir comes to. They're not eligible to apply to this grant program. It's been structured to support a certain size and type of organization. This grant program has been in operation since 2017. Nothing has changed with this program. The piece that I think we're getting a little confused about is that the Grand Philharmonic Choir has been existing outside of a formal grant process since 2012 when the program that they were applying to was disbanded. And so they just got operating funding annually through motions from council. Back in August, we approved a grant policy that was trying to create more structure around the way that we allocate grant funding into the community. So when we look at the priorities of council, when we look at the priorities of the community, that we would create programs that all eligible applicants would be able to apply to, and then they would process through a formalized process, and grant allocations would be provided. So what we're trying to do, and what we're in the process of doing, is trying to create another grant program that will support the Grand Philharmonic Choir and other organizations that have come to the region in the past, but currently don't have a formal program. So that program will be coming to council in May. Those will set out the eligibility criteria and how grants will be calculated, etc. Council will have an opportunity to comment on that at that time and ensure that that program is meeting the needs and the structure that this council would like to see, and how that's going to actually ensure that funding is put into the community. This grant program and this report that's before you at the moment is for a very specific program for key cultural institutions established in 2017. This is the way it's been processed for a while. But as we've been talking about, there is opportunity for council to look at those guidelines again and expand them or change them if that's something that they choose to do in the future. But this actual grant application at this time, and the two organizations that we're recommending funding for, is under the current guidelines as they currently exist.
So just to follow up, and since you're there, thank you for that. Very informative, and it clarifies. But the other question then that comes to my mind is, by us developing this process, which we should have a process, but will it cause an interruption or in the Philharmonic's funding that they get from us? For example, they receive funding every February, and now we're not sure when they're going to get it till June, July, August, something like that.
So through the chair, the timing obviously is going to be different, yes. We are doing our best to create guidelines that will ensure a minimal amount of disruption, while also ensuring that there is a maximum amount of transparency to allow other organizations to be able to apply as well.
Good, thank you.
Okay, I think some are on their second question, so I'm going to go to Councillor James.
Thank you. I guess, making note of what Helen said, and just the fact that in the previous years, council has just made a motion to provide funding to an organization. They've never been actually part of a process, which is extremely problematic. And this is how we get into situations where there's an assumption made that the funding will continue on and on and on, and it's outside of a process. So there has to be a formal process, and I know Helen said she's working on that. I do support the notion that there needs to be a motion with specific direction for staff around geographic area to encompass the townships and Cambridge and as well as looking at things from an equity lens with this. But I do think that that historical legacy of just making a motion and getting funding seems really problematic. And I do absolutely believe that these cultural organizations, and Grand Philharmonic is it's key to this community and historically. But again, when we're looking to create change and having something that is formalized going forward is essential at this point. So just a comment, listening to the discussion, and thank you, Helen, for doing the work. I'm looking forward to the delegation's presentation.
So on second questions, Councillor Shaw.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just point of order. I'm wondering if it would be helpful, and I know that there's a dynamic because we heard from staff. Wondering if it would be helpful for all of our questions and to move it along if we hear from the delegation on this issue, because they're coming up a lot, and it may help really focus our questions and Councillor Craig's motion. Just a suggestion for your consideration.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I just have so Councillor Leggett, Councillor Urbanovic, Councillor Shantz, whose names are on the list, are you prepared to wait and we will deal with the delegation, or do you have another question? Pardon? You have a question now? Okay, go ahead. Okay, Councillor Shantz.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I should know this, but I'm wondering why the two policies aren't coming to us at the same time.
All right, so through the chair, I'm not sure that I understand the question, which two policies?
So the recommendation for this funding and the new funding, the policy, maybe that's the wrong word, that's coming in the next month or two.
Right, so it's coming, thank you for the clarification. So through the chair, because I'm not finished yet, I think is the answer. The real answer is council just approved the municipal accommodation tax investment policy, and we're using that as our umbrella in order to ensure that the next grant program that we're creating that's planning on using the expenditure out of those funds will align with that overarching policy. That's one of the reasons. Also trying to work with various organizations in the community and having those conversations to ensure that it's fit. I suppose I can say regrettably, no, they're not coming at the same time. They do exist separately. One is a program that's pre-existing and its allocations out of that program. That's one piece. The other one is creating a brand-new program to allocate funding. So it'll be coming next month.
They're linked together. I would like to see them so we can make the decision in the completeness. But anyway, I'll leave that for now.
So I think part of the challenge in timing, I could be correct, is this is a new policy that was approved by council in August of 22. And so it's a matter of the implementation of the new policies and the new categories that have been established.
Correct.
As I understand it. Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Helen, when I look at page 10 of the report, it talks about 3-year conditional funding for the museum, and there's probably excellent reason for it, but as somebody new to the pool and still treading water, I'm trying to understand why these things happen. So the KW Symphony has no such restriction on them, but yet the museum does. Could you explain the difference and why that has occurred, please? Thank
Absolutely. So through the chair, back in, and I'm going to get my dates wrong, it must have been 2019, the museum came forward with a significant operating deficit, a legacy of significant operating deficits, as well as almost a request for double the grant funding that they'd received in the past. And that raised a flag with staff. We worked with the City of Kitchener and the City of Waterloo, who also provide grant funding to that organization through this grant program, to have a look at their operations, to see what was going on to create these large deficits ongoing, and this new need for grant funding from the municipalities. So we worked together to do a review of that organization, and we came up with a 3-year set of targets for that organization to try to meet in order to reduce their deficit over a period of 3 years. And that period of 3 years has now elapsed. We're looking at their deficit situation, and currently they're showing a surplus, and so staff are recommending that we no longer have to have the additional scrutiny that we were using with the museum.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Follow up.
That doesn't restrict their future funding, them coming before us for additional monies?
So through the chair, absolutely not. No, so they've now gone through their operating review. We've had several conversations with them. We believe that they're now in a position, and they've told us that they're in a position to operate in a sustainable way. So all of those additional restrictions have been removed, and yes, they continue to apply to the grant program as they always would.
Got it, thanks.
Councillor Urbanovic is your okay. So with the understanding committee, what I'd like to do is we'll deal with invite the delegation to appear. We'll deal with the motion before us on the granting to the two organizations, and then we'll come back, and if there's any further direction from council as to staff as to how we proceed in the future. Is that fair? Everybody's clear with that? Okay, good. Okay, Councillor Ken Sealing registered as a delegation within the last 24 hours, and so Mr. Sealing, you have 3 minutes, and just to remind you that when you're up here, you shouldn't be interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory comments about councillors, staff, or others, any hate speech or defamatory comments, and as a delegation, if we don't have any questions for you, don't feel offended. This is a time for us to listen. If this information isn't familiar to you, I can repeat it one more time. Welcome, go ahead.
There. Okay, sorry. I see you really tighten up the rules here, so you've given me 3 minutes and nothing more, and if I want to talk more than 3 minutes, I have to come back next week, they told me. So I'm going to try and be very quick. So it's sort of strange to be here on this side of the horseshoe. However, I'm here this morning in my role as the chair of the Grand Philharmonic Choir to make a request of you. Although I'm speaking to the report about funding for others, I'm really here to speak about what is not in the report. Let me say that after 7 years on the Regional Finance Committee and 33 years as regional chair, I do know that grants can be an interesting topic. During last year's and again during this year's budget cycle, the issue of core funding for the Grand Philharmonic Choir was discussed. Last year it was confirmed, and this year again it was understood from council during the meetings that operational funding for the choir would be maintained. Recently, the choir has been hearing that, in reality, the core operational funding was to be ended and terminated. For many years, the Grand Philharmonic Choir has been one of the core regionally funded cultural groups. When a consulting report was considered in 2015 by Kitchener-Waterloo in the region, a new designation was considered. These recommendations were never, to the best of my knowledge, ever approved by Regional Council, but the report was received for information. If you want to take a look, I have a copy of the report. It's back, it's in the staff will have it for you. A staff report recommended that funding for the Grand Philharmonic Choir be continued along with the others for the balance of that term, continuing to recognize it is a core cultural organization and that a further review of grants would be undertaken during the next term. When the matter returned to the next council, Regional Council reconfirmed the operational funding for the Grand Phil. More recently, during this budget cycle, there have been mixed messages about the core funding, and the issue is not addressed in the report being considered today, which is why I'm here before you today. In fact, our most recent information is that a grant to the Grand Philharmonic Choir will be reduced from about $32,000 to less than $1,000. I really don't want to get into what we've heard, but there was a reference to a new grant program. We're told it's based on hotel rooms and visitors from outside the region. When your audience is 95% regional people, it's going to be pretty hard to get money out of that fund. The Grand Philharmonic Choir is this region's oldest continuing cultural organization and celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. An exhibit at the Regional Museum celebrates choral music and started originally as a celebration of the Grand Phil. In addition to the main choir of approximately 220 persons, there is a chamber choir, a youth choir, a children's choir, all of which provide concerts during the year and sing at other events such as Christkindle Market. It hires and helps sustain the KW Symphony and rents the center in the square. It provides the choral resources to the KW Symphony for those works requiring a choir, whether it be a symphony, a choral orchestral work, or the Yuletide Spectacular. It has paid staff and maintains an office and music library. It brings other artists to town. It is a Canada-wide composition contest. Most recently, it provided a workshop for singers in many choirs across the region. This is a pretty significant contribution to the cultural life of this region and, I contend, meets the criteria suggested in the consultant's report, even though they weren't formally adopted. Let me be very clear, very, very clear. I would hope that you carry on and support the operational funding of the other organizations recommended in the report today, which I would support if I was here and voting. So I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to block or stop that from happening. Carry on with that. There is no issue with this. My request of you today is to continue operational funding to the Grand Philharmonic and ensure that an up-to-date, open evaluation of the Grand Philharmonic is done that will, hopefully, confirm why the Grand Phil continues to be an important core cultural institution that deserves ongoing operational funding from the region, as it has done for 50 years. The loss of that support would be damaging, not only to the Phil, but to the many other people and groups who benefit from it and the audiences, more than 95%, I believe, who are residents of this region. Cultural life is not just about drawing visitors to the community, but it is internal to the regional community and is part of the community's soul and lifeblood.
Just to remind,
I would hope you would agree.
Just to remind.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, good time.
Sorry.
Are there any questions of the delegation? Councillor Vanovic.
Thank you very much, and thanks Ken for coming in and for your passion for the Philharmonic Choir. I do want to just build on some of the points that you made in terms of clarification. You talked about the role that the choir plays in terms of the local community, its interrelationship with the symphony, its local concerts and so on. And then you look at the exhibit that's running for a year at the Regional Museum called Giving Voice Vocal Ensembles in Waterloo Region, as part of being inspired by the 100th anniversary of the choir. Wondering if you can just talk a little more about the important role that the choir and choir members play in the music ecosystem in our community. It's not just about coming in, listening to people who are performing in the choir, but the role that they play in terms of education at Wilfrid Laurier University, the role that they play in terms of music education around our community, and so on.
Right. Well, I think the role of groups like the Grand Phil are very important in the community, particularly if any of you have had children in school, you know the diminishment of music and arts in the school system. So all the organizations in town which actually help to build and promote that sort of thing, whether through children's choirs, through performances, through sending people out in the community, by giving a place for students from Laurier to be able to sing, all those things are very important, and I think they're a critical part of this community. Some people may not recognize, but this area was really in the forefront of choral music right from the early settlement period, particularly because of the Germanic settlers here, and then the Mennonite community moved in as well, and so it's very, very important, and it's sad to see it diminishing in so many circles. So I think the role that the Grand Phil plays is critical to maintaining that broader cultural perspective that we have and need to have to make this a broader and more broadly based community.
Thank you, and if that's very helpful. And just as a follow-up, if this funding isn't in place this year, how detrimental will that be to the Philharmonic Choir?
It's pretty tough on us because $32,000 in our budget is a lot of money. Our overall budget is between $400,000 and $500,000, which is not inconsequential. But we, as you know, as with all performing arts organizations, COVID's making a heavy hit on it, and so rebuilding audiences and ticket sales has been tough. We're still suffering from that. But going forward, to be able to do the kinds of things, without the core funding from the region, we'll have to take a look at our children's programming, school programming, the choral competitions. Perhaps we'll have to cut back on the use of the Senator Square and the KW Symphony because, as you know, we actually support the symphony. Symphony players depend on us three or four times a year to pay them to play, and so it's support for theirs, it's support for the Senator Square. So all those things will have to be examined because we're dealing not only with a reduction of $32,000 in the grant, but also the impact of COVID and its ongoing implications for us. So it will be, I think, severely damaging, and I quite frankly, given the history of the film in this community, I just don't understand why some people don't realize or fail to see why it isn't such an important institution in this region, a long-standing one, and the longest surviving performing arts organization in the region of Waterloo.
Thank you very much.
Councillor James.
Hi, thank you. Through you, Chair Erb. Just a question. In our just recent budget, did Grand Philharmonic receive any funding? No funding? So, no, go ahead, Ken.
I don't know how your budget was structured. There was a pool of funding for some of you may recall the history of this. A long time ago, we tried to get some shape to the program, and what we did is we determined core funding groups, and at that time it was the opera, the Children's Museum, the Philharmonic Choir, the Symphony, and the Arts Council at that time. All of them have sort of gone by the wayside, and when the Children's Museum decided it couldn't longer carry on, we did permit the transfer of the funds from the Children's Museum to the museum, as it's now called. But it was recognized that those were the core groups, and we did then create the Arts Foundation, the Arts Fund, to allow other people to access the funding from the region. That was the balancing off, that we couldn't afford to fund every organization. So they're trying to have a policy that's consistent for everybody in the region. I can tell you, having 40 years experience of trying to do it, it's not possible. It's not a black and white situation where you can just have one rule and say you either go this way or that way. There's so many differences and complexities of the cultural organizations in the region that there's a lot of, you can give some shape to it, but you can't have the right formula for everything. I have to be perfectly honest and frank.
So back to Councillor James.
Yeah, I just had, so what is the specific ask right now?
The ask is that you continue to carry on with the core funding of $32,000 that we've been receiving over the years, and that you undertake the review then of the policy, because quite frankly, I do not recall, and I stand to be corrected, my memory's getting worse as I get older, I do not recall ever approving a policy which said there are only two groups that we're going to fund in the future. Where there was broad guidelines suggested how we determine those, but council, in my time, never ever approved them. They received them for information, and it was there as a background report. Now, I stand to be corrected, and I may be wrong in my memory, I may be faulty, but I don't recall any move to remove the core designation for funding from the Granville Choir.
Okay, all right, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Councillor Craig.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Sealing, I want to state that I agree totally with everything you've said. So that's a coming together here.
We have agreed in the past on many times.
History has been made.
Yeah, history's been made, but you have an annual kind of deficit of what, 32,000 a year, you said?
Oh, this year will, without that grant, it'll be about 60,000.
Okay.
Based on the current.
Do you think that when we look at these organizations, that some of them that are continually having these difficulties year after year after year should have sort of a base amount built into the budget automatically so they don't have to come with cap in hand every year?
That is in fact what we did with the core funding. If you go back and read those reports, the organizations that got core funding no longer had to do an annual report. They were given an agreement for the term of council, and they got their money for those 3 or 4 years of council for those core groups.
So you agree with that?
I agree with that, yes.
Yeah, I think that's something we ought to be looking at.
I think these organizations are so strapped to if you could ever see the application forms for the various foundations and groups across Canada where they apply for funds, you almost need a person full-time to do it. So we were trying to relieve some of the workload from these groups and organizations.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Through you to Ken. Can you talk to us a little bit about the makeup of the Philharmonic, where across the region the members come from, and what different communities?
I would say that the choir represents every single community in this region. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They come up from across the region, they love singing, and I think it's rather interesting how many of them continue to sing, even with the very firm restrictions on testing and masking and everything else, continue to come out and sing and practice during that time. It showed their commitment, but they do reflect the entire region.
And from some of our more diverse communities, are you seeing, are you reaching out to some of them as well and finding?
So the programming the choir is doing is trying to reflect a lot of the things that are going on currently, whether they're Indigenous issues with music and trying to bring some of that entertainment in. This fall, they're just currently have actually commissioned to work on water and the importance of water. Which is a reflection on this region's real strong interest in water over the last few years, and it reflects on that. In fact, that just highlights another problem is that we applied to Canada Council for that money and didn't get it, so that's about $30,000 we have to find. In addition to $30,000, we lose the regional grant this year as well. So it's a tough time, and fundraising, for those of you, if any of you are involved in fundraising these days, fundraising is tough for cultural groups these days, very tough.
There are two more councillors that want to speak, Councillor Deutschman and Councillor Foxton. And then I'm wondering if we can deal with the motion that is before us today on these two key cultural institutions. I think we've been given information for the Philharmonic that that's going to be part of another process. And so I'm wondering if we can, we'll deal with these two speakers, then deal with the motion, and then if there's a subsequent motion from council for further work by staff on including other organizations. Councillor Deutschman?
Thank you, Chair, to you, to the delegation, Mr. Sealing. Ken, is it? I just wanted to clarify two things. One, Ken, in your discussion with Councillor Craig about core funding, you were talking about 4 years as the term of council, and I think Councillor Craig might have been suggesting something that's in the budget that's beyond the 4 years of a term of council. and maybe you can't answer this, or maybe Mr. Dyer can answer this, is this something that we can say is built into the budget as an ongoing obligation of the region, which goes beyond the term of a region, or is it something that's restricted to a term of council?
Mr. Dyer?
So through the chair, from a budget perspective, council approves an annual operating budget. So in the 2023 budget, there is an allocation for this stream, not the key cultural institution stream, but the stream that we're discussing today. There's an allocation in the 2023 budget for $163,550. And this is the stream that my colleague Helen Chimeri Russell will be reporting back on in terms of the provision, the terms of reference, if you will, for that stream, and then ultimately recommendations around the allocation of funding. The budget, from my perspective, is an annual obligation and requirement for council to approve. And I think certainly from a financial perspective, that's how we would treat it.
So just for clarification, Mr. Chair, so council could say, we want to give $32,000 to the Philharmonic, and it's just a continual annual donation with no timeline. Is that possible?
There's, to the chair, there's probably a way that a resolution could be structured in order to provide a longer term commitment. Whether that could go beyond the existing term of council, we'd probably just have to look into that a bit more.
Okay. And to Mr. Sealing, could you just describe it? You talked about all the different things that the Philharmonic does in the community. If the region took that on its own to provide those sorts of services to visiting schools, et cetera, what sort of value would that be? What would the cost be to provide all those services in the community?
I wouldn't even want to venture a guess. I think it's sometimes it's moral support. Sometimes it's actually the kids actually see what's going on. Sometimes it's provide a forum for the kids to perform themselves then, depending on the group that they're with. I would hesitate to try and put a cash value on it. But
I'm more like that's the benefit. But if we wanted to hire people to do that, like you guys are doing, what would the cost be to do that?
I wouldn't even want to venture a guess, but I think
would it exceed the 32,000?
Well, it could, depending on what you did. But
Thank you.
This is similar to what the KW Symphony does with players going out into schools, doing that kind of support, and there's a variety of things that go on. I just want to be clear that what I'm really asking for is that we continue the core funding of $33,000. Don't put us in a grant pool where we have to prove that so many people came to the region from 40 kilometers away in the region, which will produce probably $500 to $800 a year, or $500 or $800 a year, because our audiences are not out of the region. This is not there's some economic development proposal, but this is the health of the region we're dealing with, people in the region. And if we have to say that all our funding is based on how many people are coming here from Toronto or from London or some other place, well, we can't make that criteria, and we won't get the funding. But $32,000 is a very, very substantial amount of money for an organization like the Philharmonic Choir, and it's your local organization. This isn't an economic development organization. This is your cultural organization, and I think it needs to be recognized, and that's why I've asked that that council commit to maintaining the grant, but it also review what it wants to fund in terms of core organizations, and make that an open review, not for us to find out that suddenly, oh, you don't fit in that criteria, we've created a new pool and you're out of that pool. If you want to be openness and transparency, do the review, make sure people who are impacted by it are part of that review, and know what's going on. And then you, as councillors, will know what's going on. You won't find out at a committee meeting that suddenly the policies change and suddenly some of the groups that you thought were supported are no longer supported, or some of the groups you want to allow into the program aren't allowed in the program without your input. At the end of the day, the decision on funding is here.
It seems to me we're getting past the question and answer part here, and we're
I'm
getting
sorry.
into some policy
I'm sorry. I
conversations.
apologize.
So, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. I don't think anybody in this room wants the Philharmonic Orchestra to fail. We all want us to succeed. $32,000? You've just been promoted to councillor, correct? Can you tell me what $32,000 equates to in percentage of the taxation? It's quite minute. Would you be fair to say it's quite minute?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, was that a question for me?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Minute would be an appropriate word.
Do we really want to spend this amount of time arguing about $32,000 when in our hearts we all know that this is a good core program? Now, Councillor Deutschman suggested that it be in perpetuity, forever. You can't do that. A term of council can change that, and history changes itself. But we can start to create funds for core organizations that are essential to the region. And when I say region-wide, that means the region plus the 7 municipalities. And I think that with a memo of understanding, so they don't go through the grant process every year. They come up with a memo of understanding. Yearly, they come to council and present what they did in that year. And and again, I hate saying it, but that's how the township does it. And they do it exactly after the time the grants have come in, so that we don't have to spend so much time over $32,000, which in our budget is minute. So I'm going to suggest, can I hear what the motion is? That because I don't have my tablet.
So first of all, I'd like to get us back to the motion of the funding the symphony and the museum. That's the motion that's on the floor right
and
now.
that's what I was going to ask, is what does the motion read? Because again, I still don't have my tablet.
Oh, okay. Can we put it up on the screen? It's the key cultural institutions. That the regional municipality of Waterloo approve the 223 funding allocations of $385,725 to the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony and $385,725 to the museum under the Key Cultural Institutions Grant Program as outlined in report PDL CUL 23 dated April the 4th, 23.
So I have a question now. Where's the $32,000 come from? Thank you. It's not part of it? Okay, okay, thank you.
You have to put it in from the source.
So are we done with questions to the delegation? Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Sealing. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Wolf, seconded by Councillor Liggett. Is there any debate on the motion? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Verbanovic?
Sorry, I'm having trouble there. Now I'm officially requested. So I certainly am supportive of this recommendation in terms of the core staff one. I think these two organizations are key cultural institutions. I do think that we need to address the issue of the Grand Philharmonic, and I also do think that, you know, in light of its history of funding, it needs to be supported in terms of this year, and as Mr. Sealing indicated, have that review that's talked about in Councillor Craig's motion reference. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Chair, is I think an amendment to add that 32,000 should be considered. But I'm wondering if you think it makes more sense for it to be in the main motion or for it to be in the secondary motion. What's your preference, Mr. Chair?
I think my preference would be that we deal with this main motion first.
Okay. So I'll come back with an amendment then for the secondary one.
Okay, any other conversation or debate on the main motion before us for the symphony? Councillor Shantz, or I'm sorry, Councillor Hunick, I missed you, sorry. Move on?
I'm okay, let's move on.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Shantz?
I'm a little bit confused at the moment. I wasn't prepared to vote on this until I see both sets of criteria and am able to put them together in my mind. However, if Councillor Verbanovic is going to bring another motion for the Philharmonic, I'll think about that. I think we should include the Philharmonic in this today under the circumstances. It's been a little bit mixed up with it coming in two pieces. I believe we dealt with this last year, and the intent was for everything to come together so we could see it in one place. And so I find this really confusing.
Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes?
Yeah, just for clarification then, and following on what Councillor Shantz just said, could we have the second motion amended now so that we know what it is and decide whether, because clearly from what Councillor Shantz is indicating, it's, you can vote on one and not know what's happening with the Philharmonic on the second. Can we have a clear motion, the second one, what exactly Councillor Verbanic, because I'm supporting the direction that Councillor Verbanic's going, but I would just like to maybe have that amended.
Just 1 second here while I confer with the clerk, okay? So we don't have a So it seems that the simplest way to proceed would be to deal with the main motion that we have right now, which is the Philharmonic and the Symphony, or not the Philharmonic, but the museum and the Symphony. We deal with that one. And then if there's going to be a new motion that Councillor Craig had talked about originally about giving direction to staff that it would incorporate the Philharmonic, we could do that. Councillor Shantz?
Yeah. You know what? I think I'd like to move a deferral on this until we can see it all together. This is seeming to be a little convoluted, and I don't think we can get a clear picture to see the whole thing. So I would move that we defer this motion until next month when we can see the whole package together.
Yeah. Is there a seconder on the deferral?
I will.
Councillor McCabe?
I'll second that.
Okay. No debate on that. There's no debate on that.
On timing?
Yeah, with the next report, with the other report.
And for timing?
To May when the other report comes, so that they come together.
Okay, I guess a question to staff would be, is that timing workable? Mr. Lochner?
Yeah, I would be concerned about the two organizations that the motion relates to not getting their funding if that's council's wish. They too have expressed concern about any more delays, so council should consider that in making a determination as to whether to defer or not.
So we have a motion on the floor to defer, and we need to vote on that first. Pardon?
The deferral motion is we can debate the timing, and
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm suggesting that whatever we decide today is not final until it comes back to council anyway. And so I would suggest, instead of deferring it till May, particularly for the reasons that Mr. Lochner just indicated, that we defer it until council in 2 weeks, and that will allow us to confer with staff and get some clarity on this, which I think is what Councillor Shantz is looking for.
Okay, so the intent on the deferral then would be to come back to council in 2 weeks. Okay, those in favor of the deferral, please use your e-scribe buttons. So the deferral is carried. So do we have to deal with the one that Doug Craig wants to know? about the, yeah. So, Councillor Craig, you had been proposing a motion that staff come back with more information. Clerks has drafted something which I think they shared with you. Is that something that you want to speak on?
Yeah, that's wonderful, Mr. Chair. Okay.
Can we put that up on the screen, please?
And it says that, as you can see, it's that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo directs staff to review the eligibility criteria for funding for key cultural institutions grant program and to be more inclusive and equitable of organizations across area municipalities.
You're moving that? Is there a
Yes.
seconder? Councillor Verbenek? Any discussion on the motion?
I have a question outside this motion as we're going ahead.
Okay, so I think the first speaker is Councillor Verbenek.
Thank you. Just, I'm wondering, Councillor Craig, in the spirit of the deferral that Councillor Shantz moved so that we have clarity and are looking at these in a comprehensive way, I'm wondering if you'd be open to having it deferred until council in 2 weeks as well, so that we can have some clarity, particularly.
This isn't a huge urgent issue. It has to be dealt with, so I'm okay with that, with the timing.
Yeah, and I think it'll help us to factor in how the Philharmonic Choir factors into either motion 1 or 2. Thank you.
Okay. So the mover and the seconder are agreeing to the deferral?
I am.
And my seconder was, yeah, okay. All right. I have Councillor Foxton.
I'm okay, thank you.
You're okay. Councillor Redmond, Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Erb. You know, I think there's a lot of good intention around this horseshoe. And I guess the motion has been deferred. I would like to have a deeper dive on what equity means. Is it just geographic, or is it sort of the broader issues that Councillor James was speaking to? Because I think that that's very pertinent too. But my question actually would be through you to the staff, and I don't know if it's Rod or Helen or Bruce that want to comment, but as well-intentioned as this is, to Councillor Shantz's point, I feel like we're sort of came in halfway through the movie, and there's sort of, or the play, and there's a few more acts left to play out. So I'm wondering, does this 2-week deferral give, or week and a half, whatever it is, give enough time for staff to come back with sort of a framework that would be meaningful? I would also like to know the kind of consultation that's been gone on previous to this, to coming up with these streams of funding and how it impacts community groups and whether they have indeed been consulted on this, because my sense is there's an assumption that there was an intent to not fund the Philharmonic Choir, and I don't believe that that actually was ever the intention. It was a change in how the process worked, but I think that kind of clarity would really help as we move forward, looking not only at the delegation in that group, but other groups in the community.
Okay, so through the chair, is the question, how much information can I bring to the next meeting to ensure that you understand the difference between what is a key cultural institution as it stands and what we're proposing for the new grant program that will be brought forward in May? And a bit more of an understanding about how we've been working with the community to try to develop that new grant program, as well as a little bit of the history that's got us to where we are today. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and is that possible to bring back by the deferral date, which is the council meeting of this month?
Yeah, we can have a broad strokes sense of what's going to be there, so that you understand the difference between what is a key cultural institution that we're having a discussion about today, the new program that we're trying to develop, and seeing the difference between the two, as well as a bit of a sense of how we've been working on developing that program.
Mr. Lochner?
So perhaps just before I speak, Chair, if Helen could speak to the question of, I think the Chair asked about reducing the funding for the Philharmonic. There was a reference to doing that. Is that accurate?
Right, so thank you very much for that clarification. There has never been any intention ever at all to reduce or remove operating funding from the Grand Hill Philharmonic Choir. What we're trying to do is build systems and processes that are open and equitable and fit within the new grants administration policy to ensure that there are systems in place that organizations can come to. We understand which organizations belong where and how much funding they receive and why, and how it connects to the region's strategic plan, to their operating priorities, as well as to the needs of the community. So we're trying to create programs that encapsulate those things, and so council can make policy decisions on what they want to do and how they want to change those, rather than having to make individual decisions about individual organizations. So at no point was the objective to try to remove funding from anybody or defund anybody, but rather to build systems that were clear and open so people understood where they stood, they understand what programs they can apply to, and they understand how the process would be carried out.
Mr. Dockner?
And I would just add to the Chair's question, is it doable? Anything's doable. I think, staff are acting under the direction of prior council with this, and then the new council as well. I've heard through the budget process as well here today, and many meetings that direction doesn't sound like where this council would like to go. And if that's the case, staff would need direction, and we can bring back options. That's what I would suggest. I'm hearing some say we should create ongoing stable funding for some organizations. That's doable if that's council's policy direction. I'm hearing some say we should do that and some combination of open granting. That's doable as well. I think anything we do in that realm, and then hearing again from some of the councillors about expanding this to other or all parts of the region, this is going to cost more money. And that's doable as well if that's council's desire. So my suggestion through you, Chair, is that we bring back some options to council on council day in terms of how we move forward, and we'll bring the package forward both in terms of this as well as the current path that we're on. But that would be my suggestion, because it sounds like there's a lot of confusion, and it sounds like we're not necessarily meeting the intent of this council. So we'll come back next council meeting with a reflection of what we think we've heard.
So we have a motion to defer this. However, there are three more speakers. I have Councillor Craig, Leggett, and Huniak. Are there items that, new information that you want to speak to on this? Councillor Craig?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, what are we doing with the request for $32,000 for the Philharmonic? Is that going to be dealt with today?
I don't think so. I think that's part of the deferral, and that
That's
information
part of the
coming
deferral?
back is my
Okay.
understanding.
And I'm fine with it.
Okay. Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sitting here as a new councillor, totally confused. And I think it's good that we're coming back and going to be instructed on what has been in the past and where we're going forward. I see that this is funding for key cultural institutions. We've not been given a list of what those are. I'm looking at this and assuming only 2 are, and yet we're looking at funding for an organization that's not considered a key cultural institution. Maybe it should be, I have no idea. But I'm thinking we probably should have had an educational workshop on how this whole thing works, because the previous council had complete knowledge of this, but we newcomers around the Horseshoe have no idea. And just like last time, the last part of the budget, we have people coming to the podium who have connections to people around the Horseshoe, and they're getting heard, and others are not. So I struggle with that, and this has nothing to do with the Philharmonic. It's just the way this is all coming out. I just think it's wrong how this is being dealt with, that somebody comes up and asks for funding that they maybe should have had all along, but for some reason this isn't being set up in a way that can happen. I think the deferral is great. I'm going to support everything that's being said here today, because I want to be making the right decision for every cultural institution in this region. But I just had to say that this is a struggle to be able to make these kinds of decisions. Thank you.
Councillor Hunick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of Chair Redmond's comments that geography doesn't equal equity, I'm conscious of that. But my suggestion or my wondering was going to be that I wonder if Councillor Craig's motion should specify something about geography in terms of a grant specifically geared toward Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo individually. But I don't know. That's just for my colleagues to consider.
And we deferred that, and that can be taken into consideration when we debate it in a week and a half.
Yes, and the townships. Thanks, Sue.
Councillor Verbanovic, is this a legacy or no?
Yeah, my button's not working for whatever reason. So my question to Ms. Mary Russell is pertaining to your last explanation. If you can come back to the podium. I guess what I'm struggling with is this isn't the first organization that we're hearing from who has concerns, frustrations of what they believe they're hearing from our staff. I believe that, in our desire, like we have a genuine desire to create order, but in the desire to create order, we appear to be creating disorder in terms of the how the sector is feeling, the anxiety, the concern, especially coming out of COVID. So I'm just trying to understand, how is it that they're getting this impression that what was a $32,000 annual grant, granted may move into a different stream, different process, great, that they now feel that they're going to be part of a tourism grant that's tourist related, and this is not, Mr. Seeling's not the first person I've heard this from, and that the dollars associated will be significantly lower. So I'm just trying to come to an understanding of how we're getting there, and I guess more importantly, your thoughts on how we turn that corner.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So through the chair, this has been a convoluted process, and I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't been, right? We were moving from past practice to something that's new and trying to build more new systems around it. So the Key Cultural Institutions exists on its own with its own program guidelines and has a certain amount of stability to it. Other organizations have been funded outside of anything concrete, and Council provided staff with direction to create a new program. Through the desire to create a new program, I have been speaking with members of various cultural organizations to get more information about how they currently operate in order to try to create a grant program that can encapsulate these legacy organizations. I know we don't like that term and I don't want to use it, but I'm out of other words, right? These other organizations who've been existing outside of a formal process to get a deeper understanding about how they operate in order to be able to build a program that tries to build in as much stability as possible. So this program is still being put together in order to try to create that stability, and we're trying to support a broad variety of organizations. The other piece of it is that the funding that we're currently working with, because we haven't taxed levy funding to support this area at the moment, is intended to be coming from municipal accommodation tax. So it's trying to build a program that fits within the parameters that currently exist. If council wants to take other direction, we can certainly explore that, but it's currently what's being developed. So what I have been doing is having conversations with community to get a better understanding about how they operate, working within the parameters and the direction that's given by council in order to create a program that will ensure parameters of the stability that we want to ensure is there, as well as other bits and pieces.
Okay, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Deutschman, and then Councillor James, and then we're going to cut it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving forward, I see this as we've got funding for the symphony and the museum. That's the first motion. We'll deal with that in 2 weeks. I'll talk to Councillor Verbanovic. I'll bring forward a notice of motion that we provide $32,000 to the Grand Philharmonic. at that next council meeting as well. With respect to Councillor Craig's motion, that is a comprehensive review that no one's expecting the review to be done in a week and a half, but I think it's wise that this review be undertaken so that council has an opportunity to say what are the criteria that we want to apply, what are the criteria that we think are relevant in terms of funding, and that's more of a long-term issue. But yeah, that's just I just wanted to say that I'll bring a notice of motion with respect to the Philharmonic just to get clarity on that issue. Thank you.
Councillor James?
Yeah, this is just a question for Helen. You said you've been meeting with community organizations, cultural groups. Have you met with the Grand Phil? Because there is this notion or impression that they're not going to get funding or whatever because of the criteria change and the process change. Just confirm if you've met with them and been speaking to them about this process.
So absolutely. So through the chair, yes. Louisa D'Amato, who is the executive director of the choir, we have been having ongoing conversations since July and have been spitballing a variety of ideas. So the example that the delegation brought forward earlier was an example that I had thrown out there back in July. I certainly got the feedback that that wasn't going to work. We've been working on trying to find other ways of creating a formula and eligibility criteria and assessment criteria that would be better and build in some more stability.
I just want to say thank you for the work that you and staff have put into this. Whenever we are changing a process and trying to make it more inclusive, there is always going to be those hills and stuff to get through, and recognizing that this process is not easy. But I do have deep concerns about historically, legacy, whatever the case may be, just being given funding and not being fitting within a criteria. This is how we have a lot of situations and problems in the world right now. So working towards a process long-term does create more equitable outcomes, and it doesn't mean that we're taking away anything. As Councillor Burvanvik said, we're just building a longer table. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you, everyone. I think we've dealt with the motion. The deferral has been withdrawn. Something's coming back to us in a week and a half, or 2 weeks, like I said, whatever the case might be. Thank you. We are now moving on to the consent agenda. One item on there, I would, unless somebody wants something dealt with specifically there, I'd be prepared to consider somebody to move it and second that. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Hunick. Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Or use your e-scribe button, I'm sorry, to vote if you have them now again. Yeah. That is carried. So we dealt with the one item already. So now we are 6.1. Yeah. We're on to 7.12, the Canada-wide early childhood child education. I'm going to call on Mr. Sweeney and Barb Cardo to make a presentation to council.
Great. Thank you, through you, Chair. Introducing Barb Cardo, our Director of Children's Services here at the Region of Waterloo, who's going to provide a short presentation on this really, really important piece of work that we are privileged to undertake in this community to ensure that families across Waterloo Region have access to high quality, affordable childcare. So Barb, over to you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Sweeney. And thanks everyone for indulging me this morning. I first would like to say that before I begin my presentation, I wanted to share with you a reflection related to truth and reconciliation and early learning in childcare. And I'll start with just giving you a bit of background information. So in early childhood education, early childhood educators in Ontario subscribe to a view of the child, and it's built into our our pedagogy, for how we work with children, support children, and how we know that children best learn and grow, and in what kind of environment and what kind of relationships. But we know that core to that is a view of the child that is critical to ensuring we provide high-quality, strength-based services that build on children's strengths and abilities and interests. So here is how our view of the child goes. Children are competent, capable of complex thinking, curious, and rich in potential. They grow up in families with diverse social, cultural, and linguistic perspectives. Every child should feel that he or she belongs, is a valuable contributor to their surroundings, and deserves the opportunity to succeed. And when we recognize children as capable and curious, we're more likely to deliver programs and services that value and build on their strengths and abilities. And further to that, we know that is how children learn. And in fact, I would argue that's how all of us learn. So this view of the child has been in existence since 2014, and it's really resonated with me and with my colleagues in early childhood education, both locally and across the province. But as we have been exploring down this path of truth and reconciliation, we're also realizing that what we've been taught and what we teach children is embedded in theories and research that is primarily Eurocentric. And so it's caused us all to take a look at other pedagogies, other views of the child, to start to think about how might we rethink what we've been taught and incorporate and include the pedagogies of other cultures. And so in my search, I searched for view of the child in Indigenous groups. And I came across this very simple, but for me, profound statement. And it was created by the First Nations Early Childhood Development Council in 2009. It says, in Aboriginal pedagogy, children are viewed as sacred and are the heart of the family, community, and nation. And as I sat with that and I thought about our pedagogy that was full of adjectives and lots of words and how to work with children, I thought, wow, this really brings us to the core and truly deepens our view of the child. And I started to wonder about how it would change if every early childhood educator approached their work not just as seeing the child as capable and curious and rich in potential, but as a child who is sacred and who belongs and who's the heart of their family and their community. And then I thought, imagine if organizations or if communities took on this view of the child, as seeing the child as sacred and the heart of the community. How would that change the commitment that folks have to children? How might we see children differently, where a child is my responsibility, not just the responsibility of that parent, of their significant others, of their extended family, but that child's my responsibility too. I wondered if we would we see shifts in well-being in our communities if we all did that. We know, and research tells us, that if children receive high-quality early experiences and are truly surrounded by the community, that we will reduce homelessness, will reduce addictions, we will reduce early pregnancy, will increase high school graduation, will reduce people living in low income, and the list goes on and on. And imagine a world if we could do, if all it was for each of us to really see the importance of every child in our community, what a difference we could make in the long term. So with this view in mind, I'm going to now go into my presentation, and I'm going to provide you with a review of the Canada-wide early learning and childcare growth priority areas. But because I haven't been in front of this council before, I wanted to start with a bit of a backgrounder on what Children's Services responsibility is and a bit about the Canada-wide plan. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of the role of Children's Services as the system manager. So the region of Waterloo is the consolidated municipal service manager for childcare early ons and for planning for early year systems in Waterloo region. We're responsible for planning, overseeing, and managing licensed childcare and early years programs for children 0 to 12 at the local area. And then the various functions of that service manager model are found in the bubbles to the right on that screen. Next slide, please. Access to high quality, and you will hear me say this often, access to high quality, affordable, flexible, and inclusive early learning and childcare is necessary for children's well-being, for women's workforce participation, for addressing the impacts of poverty, and supporting a robust economy, as we learned in the pandemic. The system plan that you see pictured on here is on our website, and it is really our roadmap and it sets the priorities for where we want our community to go. It has been developed in collaboration with community partners and with parents to identify what is the work that needs to be done over the next 4 years to make this community even greater. And underneath those strategic priorities are 29 action items that go into more specifics. And I wanted to just say, I'm telling you about this because what I'm going to tell you about Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Plan, which we affectionately call CWELC, it is found all throughout this. It's not called that because it didn't exist at the time, but all the components of CWELC are built right into our service plan. So it's a beautiful complementary document to completing the work of CWELC. Next slide. So this slide provides you with a high overview and background of Canada-wide early learning and childcare. So on March 28th, Ontario reached a $13.2 billion agreement with the federal government on funding the Canada-wide early learning and childcare program. This program, you will have heard, is intended to reduce parent fees to an average of $10 per day by 2026. Fees are currently, we've already seen reduced fees by 52.75%, which is significant. It's about $500 a month for a family with one preschool child, is what that family has now saved through this program. And it's also about growth, growing new spaces in the system and getting our communities up to a level of 37% access to childcare for children who are 0 to 5. And there's a commitment in that the Canada-wide agreement to maintain or increase the proportion of not-for-profit and for-profit licensed childcare spaces to 70% nonprofit and 30% for-profit. Embedded in this as well is a very important piece around access and inclusion, and that the new spaces that we create, we will ensure that children who are furthest from opportunity have access to spaces, including families living in low income, children who are Black, Indigenous, or racialized, or children with special needs. Next slide. Thank you. So in Waterloo Region, I'm really proud to say that 98% of all licensed childcare operators have opted into CWELC, and that means they're opting into the plan to reduce fees for parents and to align their work with the purpose of CWELC, or of the Canada-wide plan. We've been allocated in Waterloo Region 1,871 new licensed childcare spaces. 789 of these are allocated for spaces that are in schools, and those spaces are already planned for and being managed through a separate process called the Schools First Capital process. What I'm here to talk to you today about is the 1,082 spaces, licensed childcare spaces, that are in the community, that are not in publicly funded schools. So they might be a caregiver's home, as in the case for licensed childcare, or they might exist in a standalone building, or a church, or some other building in the community. We have requested an additional 997 community-based spaces to bring us to the provincial access target of 37%, because our allocation did not bring us up to the 37%. But we don't know if any of the requested spaces will be approved. I can also tell you that of the 1,082 spaces that we are allowed to grow in the next 4 years under CWELC, or the next 3 years under CWELC, they are already accounted for. We're expecting significant growth, and we are experiencing significant growth in our licensed home childcare programs. They're going to use up about 900 of those spaces, and we have another 105 spaces that have been previously committed to in the community. This leaves only 77 new spaces for additional growth outside of the plan. So at the end of the day, we're expecting significant growth within our existing system. We need more spaces. We've asked for 997. Next slide, please. So the province is requiring that the Canada-wide spaces, and I mentioned this earlier, that they must support families who need affordable childcare the most, including families living in low income, children with disabilities, Indigenous children, children who are Black and other racialized children, and new immigrants. And they have directed municipalities to identify priority areas for growth to make childcare more accessible for these families. So in Children's Services, we have identified 13 priority areas across Waterloo Region, and there is a map included in the report and in the with more details in the appendix for the areas that we are going to focus our growth on. And these areas were selected because they have low access to licensed childcare and a high proportion of low-income families. This is not to say that other areas are feeling like they have enough childcare, because the reality is, I don't believe 37% access is going to be enough to meet the demand in Waterloo Region. And so I want to couch this with that in mind. Even though an area may not be listed on this map, I'm saying it may still be feeling the pressure of not enough spaces. But what I am telling you is the areas that have been highlighted are experiencing significant pressure. Some areas have 0 childcare spaces in them and a high ratio of families living in low income. And those are the spaces that we really need to be prioritizing. Oh, I've gone ahead. If you could just go to the next slide. So these are the 13 priority areas for growth. So those are the colored sections. We chose low income as a measure because we know that families living in low income face significant barriers to getting to childcare outside of their communities. So it's really important that we make sure there are spaces in those neighborhoods. And our analysis of Stats Canada data shows us that low income, in communities that have more families living with low income also have higher numbers of people who are Black, Indigenous, racialized, and are new immigrants. And so these areas do identify the target areas that or the families that we want to ensure have access. Next slide. So before we get too excited about increasing childcare spaces in Waterloo Region, I would be remiss if I didn't note that the system is in the midst of a workforce crisis, and that if it's not resolved, childcare growth will not be possible. Currently in Waterloo Region, many operators do not have enough staff to operate at their full capacity. Operators are reporting very high turnover of staff, which creates poor quality for children, is really hard on children, hiring unqualified staff, asking parents to pick their children up early from programs or reduce the number of days of their programs, or are having to close classrooms. And in my 40 years in the sector, I have never experienced anything like this. This is precedent-setting impacts of workforce crisis. And this is being certainly expressed across the province. So without new strategies and investments, targets for childcare will not be achieved. And I know you'll ask me, so what are the issues? And the big issues are increasing wages and benefits, and better working conditions for early childhood educators. Currently, It requires a 2-year diploma to work in a licensed childcare setting, and there is a significant amount of responsibility in that setting. Educators, early childhood educators, are paid the same amount as people who work in positions that just require high school education. And so that is a, really concerning demonstrator of a group workforce that is primarily women and significantly underpaid. And frankly, they are leaving the sector as much as they love the work, they love working with the children, and it's extremely satisfying. It's also very exhausting, and it requires significant levels of skill, and people are moving on because they just get tired and burnt out. Next slide, please. So this is the end of the presentation. We will be informing, we have been talking to operators throughout this process, but we are going to inform them about the current status that I've shared with you today and our plans for growth and the challenges about that growth. We will also be developing an equity and inclusion plan with stakeholders, including parents. And this plan will be for the whole system, not just for the new CWELC spaces. And I just wanted to finish by saying that while growth is exciting, it cannot come at the cost of equity and quality. We want families that are living in Waterloo Region and moving to Waterloo Region to know that we've done this well. Not just for creating many new spaces that meet minimum standards, but new spaces where families can be assured that regardless of where their children attend childcare, their child will be reviewed as sacred, as the heart of their community, as competent, as rich in potential, and where educators are well-paid, well-trained, and knowledgeable, and where the organizations that they work for invest their funds into high-quality early learning environments. Thanks.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, and it's obvious from the language that you care deeply, and we're very fortunate that to have you part of this. Thank you. Are there any questions from Council to Ms. Okay, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. When I read this report, I was a little shocked to not see North Dumfries on it, but then I understand your income in that. I wanted to recount when I first came mayor, and Ken Sealing called all the township mayors into his office, and you may recall. And he laid out spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of all the services the region gave to the townships. But he turned to me before we started and he said, "Sorry, Sue, we really don't give you anything." And since that time, we do have a child program at the Cedar Creek School, and we do have some housing. But we're very much on the low scale of what the region does give to the other municipalities. I just wanted to bring that up to not be forgotten. Don't forget North Dumfries. I'll make sure you don't forget.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I respond?
You certainly
Yeah.
may.
In fact, in North Dumfries, North Dumfries has actually the highest access to licensed childcare spaces of the region, and there's a 65% access, both in Cedar Creek, St. Bernadette's, and
St. Bridget's.
Pardon me?
St. Bridget.
St. Bridget. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
yeah,
all right.
sorry. And the AIR Early Learning and Childcare Program. So there is, by comparison, a high ratio of childcare available. As I said earlier, though, Councillor Foxton, it does not mean families aren't still feeling the pinch.
Yeah, I get phone calls daily and weekly about the lack of childcare and the lack of programs for children.
Yeah.
So the township's starting to work with other agencies to put them in ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank you, Barb, for starting off, setting the table the way you did. I think it's really important. And I know the passion that you and all of your staff have and everyone at the region of supplying childcare. I would have to tell you, I would have been amazed if you didn't talk about salary and benefits. And I'm going to suggest to my colleagues around the horseshoe is that we put a motion forward that we seriously lobby the government. To my way of thinking, this is systemic, endemic, and has been there since the 80s, talking about the fact that ECE childcare professionals are not remunerated the way they should be, and that pinch about the human resources, to me, isn't unlike how we look at long-term care and RPNs, and the fact that if we don't give them benefits and full-time salaries, they're going to leave the profession. So I would really suggest that that's something that we think about lobbying the government to ask for appropriate wages for people who are providing these essential services to the most vulnerable in our community. And Barb, I hope you're the right person to ask, but can you talk just a little bit about some of the upstream funding that has been used to actually engage the equity-seeking childcare providers, many of them in-home, but how we've helped facilitate augmenting that aspect of childcare provision?
Thank you for asking. Yes. So thanks to the equity, I'm sorry, I can't remember the correct name of it, but the fund that is managed by Regional Council, the Equity Fund, we have had some tremendous success in childcare. So in our licensed home childcare program, we have what is called the Language and Mentorship Program. And we have hired 2 home child care consultants, early childhood educator, home child care consultants that work on our team to support mostly women who have low levels of English and would not normally apply or be able to work in licensed childcare. But through this program, we have, through interpreters, been able to work with those parents or those caregivers to create their own businesses as home child care providers. And they are taking in children and providing care that is culturally relevant. So they are providing care to children in their same cultural communities and in their languages. So parents are thrilled to have access to culturally relevant childcare. Caregivers are thrilled because they actually have gainful work as a business owner of a licensed home child care program. And it is being met with such enthusiasm and has grown significantly since we started. I believe we're at approximately 25 caregivers right now who are part of that program. The other is we have provided funding to Conestoga College, the Professional Resource Center, who is working with the child care community to raise awareness and increase knowledge and around anti-racism, anti-oppression, anti-bias work around truth and reconciliation, and educators have been actively engaged in trainings and in reviewing policies and practices to ensure that they are providing culturally relevant care. The other funding that we've received is for early years navigators, and there are 4 navigators that have been hired by the Early on Child and Family Centers at the YMCA, and they are working with various cultural groups across the community. They themselves have lived experience to help families access and remove the barriers to childcare and receiving services that they have been experiencing. So not only are they in real time helping families to access childcare, they're also helping us to understand what the barriers are. I believe that's, yeah, so thank you to council for those contributions.
And just one second question. You've talked about the 37% and how that's not adequate. Do we know what algorithm or equation they settled on as a government to say 37 is the right amount of childcare?
Yeah, so the 37% is low, but my understanding it is, there's a finite amount of funding available. And so my understanding is that's what could be done with the funding that was available to grow the whole province up to this 37%. In Waterloo Region, we are currently at 26% access, so that will be an 11% improvement for us. In terms of what is needed, so there is an economist, his name is Gordon Cleveland, and we talk about him a lot in childcare because that's where his work is focused. So he's done some interesting algorithming, and based on, in the old days, when fees were a lot more expensive, we estimated at about 40% was the actual demand because it was just too expensive for a number of families who couldn't pay for childcare or get childcare subsidy. Gordon Cleveland has said he thinks that affordable childcare. The needed amount is actually 50%, but I think that might even be low, because I think more families, once it's affordable, will access the system. So, yeah, so 50% is the number of the day.
Thank you. And when it's appropriate, Chair Erb, I would like to suggest we move a motion to petition the government for adequate funding for ECE.
Clerks is working on an addition to the existing motion to try and incorporate that so we don't get involved in amendments if that's possible. So now you put your hand up, Councillor Nowak, but I don't have, I have 3 or 4 others ahead of you on the list here.
Oh, I had my request to speak in this machine here. I don't know, it's been there for a while, but anyway, go ahead.
Go ahead then.
Oh, just a quick question, Barb, and thank you for the great presentation. Are there any capital dollars available for, I mean, we're talking about expanding the system, and I can think of a few areas within our township that certainly could use more, but they're going to require some capital dollars to renovate and to make these buildings appropriate. Are the capital dollars available?
Yes, there are going to be some capital dollars available. It has not been confirmed yet, but it would be, I'm going to look to my team. Do we have numbers? What I can tell you is it's not enough. That in order, there would be a maximum of about $350,000 available for a large childcare program, a larger childcare program. So, when you think of the cost of renovations and inflation right now, that would definitely not pay for the costs of renovating a space to create childcare.
So I don't know if Chair Redmond could add something to her a motion that funds be made available for capital improvements would that be something separate, or, you're talking about ECE, but we also need funding to renovate some of these buildings to make them available.
Chair Erb, no, I'd be happy to move it, and if I move it and Councillor Nowak seconds it, I'd be happy to include that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, on my screen here, I have Councillors Leggett, Uninek, James, Wolf, and Salonen. Am I reading this right? Okay. Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Barbara. This is an extremely important report for all of us here in the region, and I was piqued by your comments about the immigrant families and their need, as well as childcare workers within that community. I think that's extremely important. I see this as no different than the labor shortage that we are seeing in the construction industry as well, to prepare for the influx of immigrants into the province. So when I look at your numbers here, I only see that as growing to an alarming rate of need. Are you taking that into consideration in your future work so that we are better prepared for this versus the housing shortage?
And I'm sorry, you're speaking to the growth of new immigrants?
New immigrants,
yes,
correct.
And population increase, absolutely.
It's gonna,
yes.
It's gonna have people coming in for the jobs as childcare workers, as well as the need for spaces for their children.
Yes, and we work closely with Conestoga College, who provides training for early childhood educators, both in a diploma and a degree program, and they certainly are part of this conversation of how do we ensure that people coming to the region have access to education, that they can become early childhood educators, or at least get an equivalent status in Waterloo region. So yes, absolutely, that's part of our work plan.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Hunanek.
Thank you, Chair. I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. And I appreciate that we in Waterloo region are trying to reach beyond the minimum. I think that's really critical as well. I'm just wondering if you know anything about the childcare spaces that are designated for disadvantaged populations. And so how does a childcare facility or home daycare get that designation. What I mean is, are they only required to serve one individual who's considered disadvantaged, or is it a percentage point, or do you have any information in regard to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm just going to back up a couple of steps. So in our service contracts with our childcare operators to whom we provide funding, there is a commitment to inclusion of children with special needs. And we also fund KW Habilitation and Kids Ability to provide support services to childcare centers to make sure that all children can be included regardless of what their needs are. In terms of the number, we don't assign a number because the definition of special needs is quite broad. And so, somebody with a minimal speech delay, certainly requires much less adaptation and adjustments to be made than somebody who is perhaps using a wheelchair and is fed through a G-tube and has significant developmental delays. So we don't attach a number. The centers can access extra funding for extra staffing if the children in the program need extra funding. And so that is provided as well. And we've done that quite well in our childcare center community and are working to get better at it in the home childcare community. Though I will say home childcare tends to accommodate a lot of kids with special needs because the smaller environment tends to work for some kids.
That's excellent to know, and I guess I'm not suggesting that we go with a number per se.
Yeah.
I just want to close the loophole of someone saying they provide specialized services when that's minimal compared to the rest of the services they're providing. So thank you for the info in that regard.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Councillor James.
Thank you for your presentation, Barbara. I just have a question, and I hope it's connected, but the request is for, the 997 spaces. In terms of the one list, because I've been through, the region's facility and all of that, how will this impact the one list? Because one of the things I constantly hear is just, going through that process and barriers within that process. Can you also speak to kind of the wait list within that?
Yes.
If there is a redesign or something that will be involved with that. Thank you.
Yeah, so we certainly have been looking at one list for many years to try to find ways to ensure that it is really effective for families. I think when we dig deeply and learn about the challenges families have with one list, it's more about the wait list or the enrollment policies of the child care center. That said, there are over 7,000 children on the wait list right now. And so it's not surprising people are frustrated and not hearing back from programs because programs' own wait lists are so long. We are, though, working, and it's on our work plan as well, for 2023 to try to get better at making one list as streamlined as possible and so that parents have real access to real information as soon as possible. And, and as well, letting parents know, trying to provide better information about where parents might find vacancies. Now, that said, there are such limited vacancies right now. I'll layer on what we're also trying to do with one list is find a way. So we know that families who are well-educated, have access to resources, have been part of the community, maybe even work, in community, some kind of community services, are really good at getting themselves onto wait lists and working the system and knowing they have to get on when, the child hasn't even been born yet and all those, and knowing where the good centers are and, according to, or knowing how to get what they are looking for and knowing how to keep poking away until they finally get a space. Sadly, families who are furthest from opportunity don't tend to have that ability to work the system. So we're trying to find ways to ensure that families living in low-income families who are new immigrants, who are racialized, who are Black or Indigenous, are getting access to the system through, in an equitable way so that they are not getting, frankly, squeezed out of the system. And to be honest, I'm a little worried about our most families furthest from opportunity being squeezed out by families who are figuring out how to get a spot in our limited number of spaces in this system. So long answer to your question, but trying to work with One Less to see how might we start to ask questions from parents that would help us perhaps to create a bit of a priority system to ensure those families are getting access.
Just one follow-up. So based on that one list, people register. It's literally first come, first serve, and how it's how the matching happens.
For some programs, yes, but every program has their own policies. So some programs prioritize staff children. So in order to have an educator work in your center, you have to be able to provide their child childcare, or the educator can't come to work. So, so there might be that kind of thing. Or there's affiliations with organizations that provide funding, and so people who work in that organization maybe get prioritized. But it's usually mostly employment-based kinds of priorities. Or if a sibling attends the center, that's another.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Thanks.
So I have two more questions here from Councillor Wolf and from Councillor Salonen, and then I'd like to get on with the motion. Councillor Wolf.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara, for your presentation and showing us the great need for childcare. I think it was about 6 years ago, the region closed 5 region-run childcare centers, and I think that was unfortunate. But since they were excellent, and I think 3 were in Cambridge. I've been getting questions from childcare providers who would like to reuse some of these former child care spaces. For instance, on Christopher Road, which I think right now is an immunization center. And I think that given the 7,000 on the wait list, we should be prioritizing regional property that's suited for childcare, since there wouldn't be the renovations needed in these buildings that were once used for childcare. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Mm-hmm. So speaking a bit out of my wheelhouse, so that comes back to regional assets and what to do with those. And my understanding is there is a process that looks at the use of regional properties and surplus properties that kind of a conversation would be a part of, but that doesn't, I don't have any expertise on that, and I'm not sure if somebody else is able to speak on to that.
Mr. Lochner?
Yes, a report is coming to council on various regional properties, including that. There are some labor and legal implications that we should also discuss related to that request.
Okay. I would just like to see, since it is a priority, that we do everything we can to optimize these buildings. And I know some are empty, some are being reused, but nothing against the vaccination center, but mobile or going to schools or other buildings or sharing that facility might work. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Salonen.
Thank you, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for your presentation. It definitely comes across that you're really passionate about early childhood education, and certainly the first 5 years are the biggest predictors on where one's life will take them and the opportunities they have, so it is very important that we talk about these things. I wanted to just quickly pop over to the map of 13 priority areas. I was just curious if that's also projecting growth, and the reason I'm asking is I know we're certainly in the township, looking at having more complete communities. And with that, it's kind of a chicken before the egg situation of, well, we want to bring in people of different income levels and have different levels of housing, but then we don't have the services to support them. And I know childcare is a really big barrier to access for individuals to be able to live and enjoy our communities. Is it looking at our long-term growth projections and creating diverse communities, or is it more so here's a snapshot of where we are here and now?
I'm going to ask my data people about that, the answer to that question. When we established the 13 priority areas, did we look at growth, or was it 2021 census data? Yeah, 2020 census? Yeah, it was 2020 census data. And so don't know where specifically you might be referring to, but what we do find is sometimes in the newer developing areas, that's where schools' first capital funding comes in quite handy, because there's often a new school being built in that area where the school board can then apply to have childcare space attached, and we encourage that and work with the school boards to make sure that happens. And so in newer areas, we tend to be able to piggyback onto that process more easily. Hope that helps.
Great, thank you.
I just have a question, if I may, as well. We had a 98% take-up. How does that equate to other jurisdictions in the province for comparison?
So the provincial average was 92%. So really proud to say, and I do attribute the relationships that the staff in Children's Services have developed with childcare operators and the trust that has been built in those relationships, that we had that high of an uptake.
And we've often used this language around this table before and other things, and the unintended consequences of this early childhood education and the value that parents see in it. We're now seeing those unintended consequences of asking for more spaces, and so it's something that we really have to take seriously.
Absolutely.
So we do have a motion. We had suggestions from Chair Redmond and Councillor Nowak for some additions to that motion, which the clerks have been working on and is now on the screen. The first part is referring to what Chair Redmond was suggesting. The second part, Councillor Nowak, I understand both of you are satisfied with, pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. So we have the first part of the motion. The second part of the motion is that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo direct the regional chair to advocate with the province of Ontario regarding the need for appropriate wages and benefits for early childhood educators. And further, that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo direct the regional chair to advocate with the province of Ontario regarding sufficient funding for capital improvements for new and existing facilities that would address the need for additional childcare spaces. That meets your request, Councillor Nowak, Chair Redmond, and we have the main motion that was on our agenda. Any comments or questions? I would ask for a mover and a seconder of the. It has been? Oh, okay. You're moving it. Okay. Moved by Chair Redmond, seconded by Councillor Nowak. Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to support the motion, and I appreciate the commentary we've had this morning in terms of dealing with issues that we have within the region with regards to childcare. I would also ask the chair at some point to look into inviting our local MPs and our local MPPs to have a roundtable discussion with members of council, because I don't feel they fully understand the circumstances under which we live in terms of trying to finance and support all the different issues from childcare to homeless issues to addiction and whatever else we may be. So I want to assure Councillor Vonvik I'm not here to shame those people. but I think we need to have some direct conversations with them, because I don't feel that they really understand. I mean, our biggest issue really is financing, and we need to have a lot more financing from the federal and provincial governments, and that would help enormously. Billions and billions of dollars go out of this region every year into the coffers of the federal and provincial government, and we get really a tiny share. And so it's those kind of conversations and questions that I think we need to raise. So it's just a commentary, Madam Chair. Make your life a little bit more complicated. That's what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
Thumbs up from the chair that she'll take it away. Councillor Williams.
It's okay. I had a question before, but I can probably just email her.
Okay. Okay. All right. All those in favor, use your e-scribe buttons, please, to vote. I'm in favor. That's carried. Thank you. I just want to confer with the clerk here on timing before we move on to the next item. If we have Okay, I just wanted to, we have a hard stop at 12 o'clock, so I wanted to make sure we had enough time for 7.2, and I'll ask Mr. Sweeney to introduce the plan to end chronic homelessness.
Thank you, Chair. I will skip my long opening given the time, and on behalf of staff and community partners who are all here today, we're bringing you an update on our plan to end chronic homelessness. As a reminder, this was direction sought and received from Regional Council back in August. So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan from our friends at Overlap. I also acknowledge Alex and David from the Social Development Center is here with our staff as well. So folks, over to you for about 10 minutes or so.
Sounds good.
We'll have time for questions. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll keep it brief. I'll just highlight on the next slide. Maybe to keep things brief, we'll move pretty quickly through this slide. But maybe as members or new members of the council, I'd highlight in August 2022, Regional Council directed staff to develop a homelessness master plan as part of the interim housing solution strategy to address growth in chronic homelessness across Waterloo Region since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as outlined in a report last year, Regional Council also directed staff to develop a plan detailing the strategies and resources necessary to end chronic homelessness in the region. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ryan Boyson. I'm a design director at Overlap Associates located downtown Kitchener. And I'll also invite Alex up in a moment to speak to her part of the process. On the next slide, I'll kind of highlight our approach that we're taking here. So in collaboration with region staff and community partners, Overlap Associates will be the lead consultant on this work, and the Social Development Council and Alex here will be speaking to her role. We'll be supporting it. I wanted to highlight a few things that might feel a little bit different about this process, and namely, the first one is that it's very human-centered. As an underlying project structure, methodology, and engine for our work, we at Overlap and through this project strive to be human-centered and incorporate diverse viewpoints into the work. Our community engagement approach specifically will happen throughout all the stages of the project, not just early on to understand the problem, but also engaging the community in solutions. We want to engage them authentically and with the intention to empower those most impacted. We'll allow what we learn through the engagement to guide our process. And that brings us to the third circle on this slide, change management. Elements of the project have been designed specifically to foster change throughout the project and actually build momentum within the community and at the region. Our focus will be on transforming the working relationships that exist and creating new ones with the community that move change management forward. And then finally, kind of underlying all of it is this idea of co-creation. We want to use this project as an opportunity to model what strong co-creation looks like in the community so that we have the infrastructure and experience in place to implement the plan collaboratively. And on the next slide, we'll want to recognize that there's a lot of groups that have experience, knowledge, expertise to offer in this process. We're going to be using the IAP2, or the International Association of Public Participation spectrum to outline the key stakeholders. This is commonly used in municipal practice, so I wanted to ground us in that. The spectrum includes the goal of participation at each level and then the promise to the public from the party doing the engagement. It moves along from inform to consult, and then, as you can see on the slide, involve, collaborate, and co-create. So through this engagement, we want to make sure that we are aligned with other processes, in particular the strategic plan work that's happening this year. Those engagement sessions will be piggybacked on by us. Where we can partner to not duplicate engagement and to avoid fatigue, we will. And the strategic planning process will align with other major initiatives across the region and seek to really maximize our engagement efforts. So staff are collaborating on data, resources, and approaches to engagement across many initiatives, including the plan to end chronic homelessness, the integrated mobility plan, and the economic development plan. And then our engagement will include, obviously, broad community engagement, agencies, institutions, businesses in the BIA, special interest staff, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to regional council, we'll also be engaging representatives from lower tier municipalities and townships, and then the provincial and federal government where we have opportunities. On the next slide, there's a few groups, including equity-seeking communities, that we really want to invite into the process. So co-creators will provide input to shape the community engagement approach, assist in really the sense-making of our findings, and help us develop the final recommendations that will be included in the plan. Co-creators will also become a champion of the plan moving forward. To support so the following groups are included in that, or will be invited to participate as co-creators: those with lived and living experience, expertise, and the consultants, equity-deserving groups and Indigenous partners, housing and shelter and housing stability organizations, as well as the health sector, and then, of course, the region ourselves. To support a more intentional process for our lived and living experience consultants, the region has brought in the Social Development Center. The center has decades of proven experience being embedded in these communities, and I'm going to hand it over to Alex, the Executive Director, to speak to this part of the process.
Thank you all. Privileged to be here, and fact that the social justice advocacy organization is part of creation of the plan tells us that the change is on the way. So we will be part of the process to transfer some of the competencies and expertise we've developed to work with lived expertise. Over a couple of decades, and particularly the last decade, that I can testify to, being at the Social Development Center, we have invested in loss heavily in our organization. Loss of funding, loss of space we shared with other partners, loss of a name. We were Social Planning Council, Kitchener-Waterloo, up until 2016. And what we gained from that loss was transformation and strength in recognizing precious value and importance to promote and amplify lived expertise, knowledge and leadership of people with lived living experience of poverty, homelessness, housing precarity. During the pandemic, we contributed to a number of working groups with the regional staff and service agencies and community members. When presented with the opportunity to contribute to the process of creation of the plan, to further our advocacy, right, on housing precarity and homelessness, we asked lived experts and regional staff questions. If we moved another slide, you would see them reflected in those 3 points. But what we asked was, can we start creating change, working hand in hand throughout the whole process to improve mutual understanding and relationships? Right from day one. Can we follow instead of lead? Leadership and wisdom of lived expertise. Can we start piloting a number of solutions based on what we know today? And we know a lot, and learn from that. Both lived experts we worked with across the years and region staff said yes. So this is why I'm here today. There are a few voices that you will be able to hear on the video, and trusting that the circle of lived experts will only grow as we move through the project. Thank you.
And there's a short video on the next slide.
I think this is a very important project because people who are affected will have a chance to sit down at a local level and talk to the decision makers and be part of this that affects them. And it gets the people at the region to hear what people at a local level are doing and to plug into that, and people at a local level to plug into the region.
I believe being a part of this group and working with regional staff is wonderful because I think of myself as a bridge and the group as a bridge to work with regional staff. So, you know, with me living here at a Betterton City, I see people all the time, new people coming in. We have a new perspective.
Well, I've been doing advocacy on homelessness for over 20 years. And I haven't seen a whole hell of a lot change. It's important that now we make changes. And the biggest change is having people who are experts at it, who've lived the life, in on decision making.
Throughout the work of the Lived Expertise Working Group, we have seen the value of having city staff do long-term engagements with lived experts. So we are very excited to see with this, regional staff and lived experts will be collaborating throughout the implementation of the plan to end chronic homelessness.
So while some of these folks couldn't be here today, we wanted to underline the importance of their voice in our process, and particularly collaborating on them, not just on what the issue is and articulating that, but moving forward with solutions and prototyping and piloting those. On the next slide, we'll see just a little bit about our process. We have a 4-stage process, but again, engagement happens throughout this, and Social Development Center and Overlap will be collaborating throughout. Their work in particularly aligns really well with the pacing of our process. Will have a significant impact on the outcome of the work. So you're hearing us from us today to introduce Overlap and the Social Development Center and to provide a bit of an overview of our project and specifically our engagement approach. You're going to see us again in September to update on the problem, so the gaps and the needs analysis that we've conducted, to update on community solutions, so what we're actually hearing through the engagement work, and then also hopefully to provide a bit of a draft framework or outline of the plan so you can kind of understand what to expect. Then in November, we'll come again to present back. I think November is well-timed because of the budget implications that this plan would have on the 2024, the following budget year. And we'll really transition then to finalize the plan as a result of that November meeting and focus on the implementation and co-creation of the plan and the change management process moving forward. On the next slide, I just wanted to quickly highlight, we have understanding that communications will play a key role in supporting this project. We have a comprehensive communications plan. It outlines a phased multi-channel approach to ensure broad awareness of the project and to encourage widespread public participation. We'll create equity-informed materials that will be distributed through a variety of channels as listed here, as well as informal community networks based on consultations with the region's READY team and our community partners. And through these efforts, we will provide easy access to project information and highlight ways to participate, ensuring that anyone who wants to be involved will be aware and able to do so. And attention will be paid to communicating regularly with regional council and local municipal councils. Finally, connections will be made throughout the chair's office to federal and provincial government representatives and will link to ongoing advocacy efforts. I'll ask Peter Phillips, the region's project manager on this work, to close this out.
So next slide. In closing, at the end of this year, we will have a plan to implement, which will provide a roadmap towards ending chronic homelessness. It is important to note that the process for creating this plan is just as important as the plan itself. Central to this process is the co-creation of the plan with those who are most impacted by homelessness, service providers, and many other sectors of our community across the region. We have inclusive engagement approaches tailored to meet the different needs of communities, individuals, and organizations to ensure meaningful engagement, both urban and rural. There will be opportunities for all members of the public to participate. As we have said, the communications strategy will invite, inform, and educate the public about the challenges and the solutions for ending chronic homelessness. Through the process of co-creating the plan, we will change the way we do the work, resulting in lasting relationships based on trust and mutual understandings. Together, we will find solutions, and together we will implement the plan to end chronic homelessness. Thank you, Chair, and through you, members of Council.
Thank you for the presentation. I have 3 questions from councillors, Councillor Vanovic, James, and Deutschman. However, at 12 o'clock, we are taking a 20-minute bio break. If we don't get through those questions by that time, we'll resume because we'll come back. We have the paramedics waiting as well, and my suggestion will be that when community and health services is over, we're going into closed, and we'll do our lunch during closed session. So we have 5 minutes before we take a bio break. Councillor Ranovic.
Well, thank you very much. And I mean, first of all, thank you to you, the citizen groups that have been involved as part of this, and to our staff who have helped really move this all forward since we originally passed the motion last June, as well as all of the other work that's been done to support our partners in terms of opening new facilities. Really excited, really important work, and I think as the report indicates, and as Mr. Sweeney, I think, referenced in some media reports, this will really allow us to fundamentally understand what the issues are and have a community dialogue around how we move forward on this, because it is a complex issue, and the community needs to be engaged as complete partners in this. I guess my only question that I have is in regards to the identified plan co-creators. Great list, but in my mind, what seems to be missing from there is the local municipalities, the 3 cities and the townships. And while I think we all recognize that housing and the shelter system management is a regional responsibility, the reality is, particularly in terms of the urban centers, we live and breathe these issues every single day, and the townships do as well. In terms of some of the smaller encampments. So I'm just wondering why we don't see the local tiers on the list.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Vanovic. I believe there was a reference around the communications plan to ensure that the area municipalities are involved, and despite sort of a list that was on the screen, there was a specific group of folks. I think I would look at the last bullet was sort of the region, maybe decapitalize that and ensure that we have a conversation and engagement with all the area municipalities. So I can assure you that will happen.
Yeah, and you don't need to uncapitalize it.
What I
simply
mean, yeah.
Maybe just add area municipalities to it, and then there's sort of a clear reminder for all the partners that that's part of the discussion in the equation.
Agreed. Understood. Yep.
Thank you. So that change can be made.
Councillor Uninek.
Thank you, Chair Erb. I have a question with regard to page 38 of the agenda, which I think pertains to this report, but I'm not sure. So if I'm wrong, please let me know. I realize that there has to be a significant amount of money allocated toward creation of the plan and implementation implementation of the plan, but the discrepancy between that and the allocation for staffing cost seems significant. I think it was 7.4 million versus 0.8 million. So if those presenting the report or Commissioner Sweeney could speak to that, that would be awesome.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. We are, I think it's a good point to make, is that the investments that this council made in 2023 is to provide us with the resources to continue to act the urgent crisis of chronic homelessness in this community. This is a parallel track process that will need to come together, and I envision a time, and hopefully in the not too distant future, Councillor Hunick and rest of council, that we will come and provide you and this community with a roadmap of not only what it will take, but what the resources will be required to implement. So to sort of address those challenges when we actually have the plan and we know how to resource it.
So for now, can you speak to, like, what's the 0.7 million in staffing cost versus the amount that's for the implementation? Do you have any specifics on that?
I don't have the full I don't have the full breakdown, but we did, obviously the resources required to put this plan together and to do all of the community engagement. The resources to actually implement a plan to end chronic homelessness will come later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are taking a 20-minute bio break and a recess. Okay, I'd like to call this committee meeting back to order. And we will continue dealing with the chronic homelessness plan. Unless people have changed their minds, and I'm not encouraging anything or just, discouraging anything, but the speakers that we have lined up are Councillors James, Deutschman, Wolf, Salonen, and McCabe. Councillor James.
Okay, thank you, through you, Chair. And thanks for the presentation. So we're talking about ending chronic homelessness. So a couple of questions around defining chronic homelessness. And I'm very conscious of, when we use absolutes in language and ending. And what does that mean? Where is this, evidence throughout, globally? Because this is a crisis, but without the adequate funding, and there are systems at play in terms of, our education. We just had a presentation about early childhood education, and some of these start, it starts from very early age. And so I do have concerns, and I know previous council approved, the ending chronic homelessness, but have we bitten off more than we can chew? Just to keep it, just to be upfront about this. And when we speak in absolutes, without a significant timeline, is it something that is realistic and that can be measured and that can be done in a reasonable amount of time, going into some of those SMART goals with how we achieve this? But if you could define kind of the chronic homelessness, and I'm also conscious of the realities of there is the visible, but then there is the invisible when it comes to chronic homelessness and identifying that within this region.
Thank you. I'll take a shot at starting and happy to turn over the team. I believe the definition we're continuing to use is 6 months. Is that still correct? So chronic homelessness, as we define it, is ongoing homelessness for a period of 6 months or beyond. So just in terms of definitions, that's the easy part of the answer, Councillor James. I think the essence of your question, what I'm ruminating on is, have we bitten off more than we can chew? And I guess my response will be twofold. Number one, I would like us to come forward with a plan that would lay out the roadmap, the timeline, the resources, the commitments that would need to be in place if we really wanted to end chronic homelessness. I would prefer that route than sort of ending chronic homelessness. And so in a space like this, we do know that there are communities that have gone down this path, jurisdictions that have. My understanding is it's one thing to end chronic homelessness for a period of time. It's another thing entirely to ensure that it stays that way. So I guess my hope and dream for this is that we will come back to this regional council and present to you a document, a plan, a roadmap to say, if this is what we want to look like as a community, here's what it would take. The next question is going to be the harder one, is do we have the appropriate resources, willpower to put together everything that would require? One of the upsides potentially is if we can map out what this might look like in Waterloo region. My assumption is if we could do it here, it can be done anywhere. So I understand it sounds aspirational. I don't know what that timeline is going to be, and I'm specifically not putting a time frame on that because I think that has to be informed by the work and by the data. I hear the caution and I appreciate it. I think the alternative is that we have some level of acceptance, and I think there are also jurisdictions across North America where potentially have fallen into some level of acceptance, and I hope that we can do better.
Okay, so my other thing is you talked about kind of that co-collaborative model, and I know Councillor Prevanovic mentioned kind of, the absence of really having the cities and the townships involved in that process, but I also think it needs to be significantly bigger than that because, chronic homelessness is systems that are at play here. So from the education, all throughout, even within private sector, and then those with the lived experience as part of the conversation. I'm also conscious too of, chronic, you say 6 months, You know, we've got a lot of gentrification happening in this region, which is impacting that, inflation, all of the things that are impacting that. And one of the things I'm conscious of when we look at ending chronic homelessness is around that gentrification piece. And nobody asks, where do people go? The invisible homelessness, chronic homelessness that exists, and addressing that throughout this process. So if I could see part of that in this process too, and I mean, it's hard to identify, but it is a piece that is very important in this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Deutschman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Erb. Yeah, I share much of the concern that was expressed through Councillor James' comments, and not because of any dispassion for people who are suffering homelessness. I mean, it's well known that we all have a passion and concern for what is happening. I struggle to find any jurisdiction in North America that has successfully ended chronic homelessness. And my concern about a plan that says plan to end chronic homelessness is setting us up for an unrealistic expectation or outcome. I mean, I like the last line of paragraph 8 of your report in conclusion, and it says, by working together to end the experience of chronic homelessness for residents, and I appreciate that that's the goal, but we haven't seen that anywhere. Even Medicine Hat in Alberta declared the end to chronic homelessness, and within less than a year, it was back again. I'm hoping, 2 questions. First one, if I take Commissioner Sweeney, what you were saying, we're still going to be working on our shelter systems and looking at the next projects beyond the existing Better Tent City that we're putting together right now, and that this work is not going to be stopping that work. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor Deutschman, that is correct. The intention is that the work that we are doing as the service system manager with our partners and colleagues across the community to deal with the acute situation of chronic homelessness in this community will continue. This is in no way intended to slow down, study, and pause while putting other actions on hold. So they will, all of that work will carry on, as difficult as that will be to maintain from a capacity perspective. That is the intention, yes.
Right, and I agree with that, because we have the court application, the public document, the decision, which requires us to do everything we can to create more accessible shelter spaces in our community. Another thing I wanted to find out, Commissioner Sweeney, are we going to be doing an updated count on homelessness and chronic homelessness in our community?
So I might actually ask staff, I don't know when the next national pit count will occur. It did occur last September, as everybody knows. So I know that's a national initiative, so I don't know the answer to that. We do have what's called a by name list that we use through a HIFIS database as well. But I guess I would expect that as we continue to work through this plan, some of that data will come out to give us, if there's potentially a different picture, we'll deal with that, but I don't know when the next pit count is, Councillor Deutschman, but I can find out for you.
Whether it's national or what have you, wouldn't we need to do a count locally so that we know the extent of the crisis that we're dealing with in terms of the plan that we're putting together?
Yep, and I would say the access to the data that we have, while not perfect, does include processes and tools for us to go out and use the by name count. It is currently the most accurate real-time piece of data that we have. We're going to miss some people here and there, Councillor Deutschman, but overall, it's an ongoing process we have to attempt to enumerate the number of people that we're trying to serve.
Yeah, last thing, I have no doubt we're going to miss people. I mean, this is the whole essence of the crisis and the issue that we're dealing with. This is a very difficult file to have, and I appreciate all the work that you and your team have been putting together to get the Better Tent City set up at Herbsville, and that's a massive amount of work in a short period of time that you all have been doing, and now undertaking this study and project is going to be significant. I look forward to, as the plan develops, hearing what the funding situation is. I want to echo and tag on to Councillor Craig's comments. We need to get the province and the feds involved, because I can't imagine that we alone as a region will be able to fund everything that needs to be done to come anywhere close to ending chronic homelessness in our community. Thank you. Thanks for all your work.
I want to keep us moving. I got two speakers here, yet Councillor Wolf and Councillor Salonen, and then I'd like to move on. We still have a number of items on the committee agenda. We have lunch, we have a closed session, and then we have planning and works later. We got a long afternoon ahead of us. So, Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report, Peter, but I was looking, I think the community consultation is important, but I think action is needed. And I just, I'm a little concerned about waiting till, is it December, for the actual plan, when we've got people living on the streets right now. And my other concern is not just ending chronic homelessness, but preventing homelessness. And I'm wondering if that's where we need another motion to the province and to the federal government. So, for instance, as Councillor James brought up, gentrification, but we have things, renoviction is going on daily. You know, we don't have rent control in terms of if it's vacant, they can charge whatever they want to the next tenant. You know, even if there was some law that said that they could only raise up to 20% as opposed to 200%. So we're, you know, with some of our older apartments that are right now that are affordable, we're seeing them bought by developers and no longer being affordable. So it's like we have this boat and we have a big hole in it, and our affordable housing is leaking out faster than we are replacing it. So I just wanted to know your comments on preventing homelessness and what you think we should be doing.
So, limited as it is, my understanding of the challenges related to homelessness and chronic homelessness shows me that preventing chronic homelessness is not going to be cannot be the responsibility of one level of government. It requires it's like somebody said, it's a system challenge. It's multifactorial, and each individual who's experiencing homelessness that I've had the opportunity to have conversations with has a story unique to themselves. I will say, however, that the overall work, what you're seeing today is just a slice of the work that the team at within the regional municipality of Waterloo and our partners in the community are tackling on a daily basis. Every single day we have hardworking staff and community partners doing work that for most people goes unnoticed, and that's keeping people who are precariously housed in a place that is safe and secure. We do that every single day across this community. Every single day across this community, we work with our partners to find safe, warm spaces for people who are currently living outdoors. That will not stop. What we're adding here is a new element to the work that we do here, is to say, if we only continue to do that, we will have challenges well into the future. And so without also doing the necessary work of looking at what are those root causes, what is the continuum, and what could a path to ending chronic homelessness look like, I believe we're always going to be in this vicious cycle. I was at a community meeting last week when a community leader said, we have to be careful not to have linear plans to deal with exploding growth in the challenges that we're trying to face. So if you have exponential growth in a challenge and you have a linear plan, you're in trouble. So this is us trying to catch up and to do the necessary work on multiple paths and multiple tracks. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Salonen?
That's fine. I can hold off my comments and just speak to Peter directly. Thank you.
Thank you. So this was for update only. I think it's been a good conversation. Thank you for the presentation you made. It's daunting work, but it's good to see us taking this initiative, and thank you for leading it. It was, I was very encouraged to be invited to the first meeting where overlap was present and hear the energy and the creativity and the risk-taking that was being expressed around the table to move this forward, and so looking forward to it. Thank you. On to item 7.2.2, an update on the interim housing plan. Mr. Sweeney. You're on again.
Yes, thank you, Chair Herb. I'll keep this brief given the schedule today, and also again say thanks to the team for putting that presentation together. I will just do a real quick verbal update on the progress of our hybrid outdoor shelter on Herbs Road. I had an opportunity to visit the site yesterday. It's coming along very nicely. It's interesting to see something in development like that within just a few short weeks, a number of individuals will, for a period of time, call that home, and the community that will pop up around that and allowing that space to continue. We did have some challenges with the construction of the community space, which, as you all know, is vital to operating this facility, so that we have the space, obviously, for food and washrooms and showers, but also, as importantly, space for community conversations to happen to help people get onto housing paths. So we had a bit of delay there. So we're now targeting towards the end of the month to open this up, as opposed to the middle of April. Our colleagues at the Working Centre have made significant strides to connect with folks who are interested. There's a transportation plan in place for those who say yes to safely bring folks out there. So that's underway. And I guess I'll close with, as I was there with Ryan and Kellyanne yesterday, and a car drove up, and the window rolled down, and there was an elderly couple driving, and the gentleman looked at me and he said, I was in housing. I used to build homes. And he said, we've been paying attention. We just live a few concessions over. And then he looked at me and he said, I really, really think this is a great idea, and I really, really hope it goes well. And so I said thank you on behalf of the entire team for that. So a couple weeks delay at this point, but everything is tracking well, and we're looking forward to bringing that online. And again, given the time, I will just limit my verbal update to that update here today.
Thanks, Mr. Sweeney, and thanks for the work that the team's doing. This is a brand new initiative, and many learning experiences along the way, and thanks for the work. On to item 7.23, our chief and deputy chief have been patiently sitting here listening to previous conversations, and are here to give us an update on the response time performance plan. Chief Riches.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Council. It's a privilege to speak to you today. We have two brief presentations, and we know we're in between people and lunch, so we'll be as quickly as we can. One of them that I'm going to speak to first is the response time performance plan, and then Deputy Chief Patender will speak on our 2022 KPIs. What we would ask is that your questions about either just wait until we're done both presentations, because they are connected, if that's okay with Council. For context, the response time performance plan is a legislative requirement for every paramedic service in this province. We must submit at the end of March of every year, and so we did meet that deadline last Friday on our response time performance plan metrics. There are some challenges with that plan, which I'll highlight. Next slide, please. So the first one is, I'm pleased to announce that all the Ministry of Health compliance targets we have met, which is obviously a testament to our staff. Our paramedics work really hard every day in less than ideal circumstances with lots of pressures. And at a time when the healthcare system in general, and emergency health services specifically, is under extreme pressures, our paramedics are consistently providing excellent patient care and compassionate patient care to those that we serve. However, even though we're meeting the requirements, the results indicate that compared to our 2021 response time performance plan, our performance is being challenged, and it is worsening a little bit and getting a bit slower. Next slide, please. So something I need to inform Council about is the challenge with this response time performance plan. So the Ministry of Health sets out criteria that we must report based on CTAS, which is the Canadian Triage and Acuity Scale, which paramedics apply once they've assessed the patient and started treating the patient. The challenge with that is Our response times and how we are dispatched to calls, if you'll remember when I presented at the last council meeting, is based on an antiquated dispatch system that 80% of the time sends all of our ambulances out on a code 4 lights and sirens response. So if you're a code 4 at the dispatch end, but a CTAS 5 at the treatment end, what it means is we're always going to meet those targets because we're rushing to those low acuity patients. Conversely, what it also means is that for patients that are CTAS 1 or 2, our sickest patients, because of the dispatch system, it means we may not be able to get to them as quickly as we can, because as I said before in March, 80% of the time we're running code 4 to all these calls, and then we find out afterwards that the patient is either really sick or really not sick. And so that's the challenge with this, but it's a ministry requirement, and so to be compliant and maintain our land ambulance service operator license, we submit a report. So the first requirement we're required to report on is on sudden cardiac arrests. And as I mentioned, the paramedics apply the CTAS scale each time. The challenge here for sudden cardiac arrest is the ministry sets a target rate of 6 minutes, and we must achieve that 50% of the time. Our response time is 6 minutes. So we're well above the 50%, which is great. We're very happy with that. Last year, with council's approval, we set an internal target here at the Region of Waterloo Paramedic Services of 70%. So we haven't achieved that 70% on the sudden cardiac arrest, just so everybody's aware. And at the 70th percentile, our response time to sudden cardiac arrest right now is about 7 minutes and 7 seconds. So that means 70% of the time, we're getting there in 7 minutes or 7 seconds or less, is how it works. And in 2021, our results were obviously better than that. For example, in 2021 at the 50th percentile, at 2021 we were achieving that 72% of the time, 6 minutes or less. And so in 2022, it's about 65%. None of these numbers, by the way, even though I'm still new in the team here, none of these numbers surprise me. These are not unique to the Region of Waterloo. Every paramedic service in the province is experiencing these pressures. Next slide, please. For CTAS 1 and 2, and again, I'll remind council that CTAS 1 is your sickest patient, CTAS 5 is your least sick patient. So for CTAS 1, so those patients that require resuscitation separate from sudden cardiac arrest, because there are other patients that we try and prevent going into cardiac arrest, and those are your resuscitation patients. Our target is 8 minutes or less, 70% of the time, and we're pleased to report that 74% of the time we are achieving that. And at the 70th percentile, actually, our numbers are really good. So we're responding 7 minutes and 31 seconds or less. That's the 70th percentile. For context for council, in 2021, that number that you see, it was 79%. So it's about a 5% degradation. Again, none of this is surprising to any of us in the system. At CTAS 2, our goal is 10 minutes or less 80% of the time, and we achieved that at 81%. And for context, for CTAS 2 last year, the target, or in 2021, it was 83%. So again, a slight degradation in performance. Next slide, please. For CTAS 3 and 4, the target is 11 minutes or less 80% of the time, and again, we're hitting that target at 81%. And for 2021, for council's knowledge, it was 84%, so a slight decrease. And in CTAS 4, very similar, 83% of the time we're getting to CTAS 4 patients in 12 minutes or less, and in 2021, that was 86%. And then the last one was CTAS 5s, and again, these are your least sick patients, your lowest acuity patients. The target is 12 minutes or less, 80% of the time, and we're right on 80%. And in 2021, we're at 84%. And so before I hand it over to Deputy Chief Patendra, what I will say is that there's a lot of different reasons that these numbers are trending the way they are. A lot of which we've already brought to council's attention, either through the dispatch advocacy we asked for last month and other previous measures. We're certainly experiencing an increase in call volume, which Deputy Chief Pretender will talk about, which is a significant pressure on our system. And then obviously offload delays and other measures are also impacting this. So at this time, with council's, with your indulgent chair, I will pass it over to Deputy Chief Pretender, and then we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it is afternoon. Let me start in the morning. Can I go to the next slide, please? All right. So as you can see, our vehicle responses, unit utilization, offload delays, response times, and code yellows have all increased, as you can see. Next slide, please. Our vehicle responses increased by 11% over 2021. So our vehicle responses in 2022 were 70,629, and in 2021 they were 63,607. Our unit utilization in 2022 was 48.3% versus 41.7% in 2021. That's, as you can see, it's an increase. Sorry, I was going to say something else in regards to that. We hit, so the target is 35%, as in the master plan. We hit that twice, or we hit it twice in a 24-hour period, just below 35% at 4 o'clock in the morning and at 6 o'clock in the morning is the only time where we hit either 35% or we hit below 35%. Some of the mitigating strategies is Council approved the Paramedic Services Master Plan shift from the low to the high growth scenario. The addition of frontline resources to address call demand and unsustainable unit utilization, and further advancement of our community paramedicine program to address the high utilization 911 users. Next slide, please. Offload delays in 2022 resulted in 601 ambulance days lost. That's the equivalent of losing 3 12-hour ambulance shifts per day. In 2021, that was 250 ambulance days lost. Some mitigation strategies advocate to and work with our hospital partners to address system pressures that cause offload delays, maximize use of the Ministry of Health designated offload nurse program funding, as well as expand our patient care model standard options such as treat and release, treat and refer, and alternate destination. Next slide, please. Our code yellows and reds. Our code yellows percentage of time spent in code yellow was 10.3%, a substantial increase from 2021, which we were at 4.2%. Code reds percentage of time in 2022 was 0.9%. Again, a big increase over 2021, which was 0.2%. Some of the mitigating strategies, advocacy to speed up the implementation of the MPDS, which we've brought forward, as well as council approval for Paramedic Services Master Plan shift from low to high growth scenario, in addition of frontline resources to address call demands. Next slide, please. In our response times were 17 seconds slower in 2022. Our response time for, this is emergency calls, code 4s, 80th percentile was 9 minutes and 15 seconds in 2022. And in 2021, it was 8 minutes and 58 seconds. Some of the strategies we're looking at, increased response times will be mitigated by addressing the other factors impacting our resources, such as offload delays, implementation of MPDS, as well as the council-approved Paramedic Master Plan to shift from low to high. And I believe that's it. Next slide. Questions? Yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Deutschmann.
Thank you, Chair Erb, and I want to thank both individuals for their presentation today. Just as an aside, I would like to give future consideration to having members of our services like paramedics speak earlier in a meeting rather than having them sit through a lot of other presentations, etc., because of the importance of what they're doing for us. I wanted to ask, I noticed in the one report, the increase in code reds from 0.2 to 0.9%. And I was just wondering if there's a level where a community is in danger medically. And I'm hoping that the additions of vehicles and staff will help alleviate that going forward. My first question.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the question, Councillor Deutschmann. I'm on record as saying that anytime we're in code red, it's a public safety issue and concern and emergency for our community. There are a lot of different reasons why code reds exist. We tried to highlight in the report some of our mitigation strategies to address those code reds, but they do include working with our hospital partners, offload delays, and losing paramedics, as Deputy Chief Patendra pointed out, losing the equivalent of 3 12-hour ambulances per day to basically staying in the hospital is really, really significant. And so that's one of the challenges. What I will say is that the council approved shift to the high growth scenario is a significant help to us as we address our resource demand. An 11% increase in call volume is not sustainable. I think we were projecting a 6.5% increase in call volume, if I'm correct, for 2022, and then it jumped to 11%. And some of those factors that create 911 calls are something that myself and my team are going to be working on and trying going, how do we get to the front of this rather than just be a reactive response model? So I hope that answers your question relative to the master plan. It is definitely very helpful. In speaking with Commissioner Wong, our intent is to come back, I believe, in this calendar year to give you an update about the master plan as we identify some of the other, I'll call it analytics, that can help us decide, are we headed in the right direction and what we need to do next.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've got a few other things, but just as an aside, I mean, we see code red notices that come up in social media, but I don't believe they're from us officially. It's from the union. I mean, that's just a whole different thing I don't want to get into right now. But and I see the province did commit funding to try to help alleviate the offload issue, which, if that's correct, I'm glad to see. Is there anything that the region can do? And I know we dealt with this issue. It's been it's a decades-long issue, the offload issue. But is there anything the region can do now to help assist you with the offload issue?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a really great question that probably takes longer than this one answer can provide for you, Councillor Deutschmann. What I will say is, in the provincial budget last week, the province did commit to continuing funding at a higher level the designated offload nurse program. We have not received our funding letter to that regard yet, so we don't know what that money will be for the next provincial fiscal year, but we are anticipating that it will be at or above what we've traditionally received. The challenge with the offload delay issue is it really does sit in a different area of the health sector and the acute care sector. And, you know, my opinion, if you're asking, is that's a primary and acute care thing, which should be 100% covered and funded by the province of Ontario. And that's where the designated offload nurse funding comes from. What I could ask for council, or if you're looking for something more to do, it speaks to our ongoing advocacy to our hospital partners and healthcare system partners to address hallway medicine. I actually was meeting with a different deputy today. We are planning to meet with, we're going to start with our Cambridge Memorial Hospital and then meet with all 3 hospitals in the next couple of months to sit down and talk to them and really advocate to them that the challenges they're going through are really impacting our ability to serve the community. And that really is the big issue. And then once we can all agree to that, then hopefully we'll see some relief on the offload delay issue.
Okay, so please keep us updated on your advocacy and, you know, and also advise if there's anything we at the region can do. We all agree the province needs to do more, but we can't always wait for the province. And I just want to extend a thank you to the women and men of the paramedic services for the work you do in our community. Thank you.
Councillor Deutschmann, Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. Just wondered if you could give us an update on the diversion program that you had talked to us about a couple of months ago with respect to diverting, or I don't know if that's the right term, but diverting some of the calls for mental health and where that's at, and anything further we should know about that, because it sounds like a really really great idea to help address some of the issues that you've been outlining.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your question. And through you, Mr. Chair, we did list this as one of our mitigation strategies to address some of our challenges. I am happy to report that through the Cambridge North Dumfries OHT, they've stood up what I call a mental health and addictions clinic. It's actually inside the hospital at Cambridge Memorial Hospital. It's on the 3rd floor. And it's an 8-week pilot project, and what we were able to work with them on is in the last 4 weeks of the project, our paramedics, with the help of Cambridge Memorial Hospital ER, will be able to divert patients that meet criteria to that clinic. We don't have numbers on that yet. It's literally, I think today is the first day, if I'm not mistaken. One of the things we're trying to push is a proof of concept. So once we can prove to the province, hey, this works, it's safe, it's effective for our patients, then we hope that that will start to drive some of the work that Director Nichols and Kevin Patendra, Deputy Chief Patendra have been doing on hopefully advocating for a mental health and addictions alternative destination clinic within the community. And so that's kind of, I think that's what you're asking, Councillor McCabe, and we're certainly really excited to see that. And I'm on record as saying is even if it diverts 5 patients, that's a better experience for those 5 patients. And so that's where we really want to make it about the patient experience primarily.
Thanks very much for that. And I don't know if it's possible, but assuming that this system works and as a mitigation strategy, and again, really appreciate you thinking very, creatively or innovatively around this to create a better patient experience. I think that's really important. Is that something that you think, and I know this is hypothetical, but that you think like that might be something that the police could use to divert some of their calls as well beyond paramedics or maybe other services too?
Thank you for your question. Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, our approach is we want this to be a very holistic alternative destination option. And in the long term, we see paramedics, police, and also patients themselves being able to access this clinic even if they don't use 911 system.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That sounds really hopeful. So we'll look forward to your update when you have one. Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation and the work you do on behalf of the community. I just wanted to dig a little deeper to the provincial announcement about offload delays and the fact that there's additional funding. And I recognize we don't have the letter and often the devil's in the detail. But what I sort of inferred from your answer was that because it's in acute care and that's where the funding is, and what I've heard anecdotally is that when there's whatever the code is within a hospital, that the offload delay person then gets diverted to whether it's Emerge or wherever. And I'm just wondering if that's specifically something that needs to be advocated on, that a designated person for offload delay, that needs to be where they're all the time?
Thank you, Chair Redmond, and through you, Mr. Chair. Great question. To give context to Council, the province, through the Emergency Health Services Branch, we act as a funding agent. They submit funding to the Regional Waterloo Paramedic Services, and then we flow that funding to our 3 hospital partners for the designated offload nurse program. And there are supposed to be performance criteria connected to that. The position must be staffed, and there must be somebody in the position. But in speaking to our hospital partners, as everybody probably around the Horseshoe knows, the hospitals are really struggling with staffing as well. And so sometimes they can't staff that position all the time. And certainly we are aware of times where despite the fact we want an offload nurse in the position or somebody staffing that position, there are times where they're short-staffed in the Emerge or the person is called away for a different high priority reason. I do intend to, and we do intend to meet with our hospital partners to try and get them to work with them to develop a more robust staffing plan that will fund it, and we know it's going to be staffed all the time. Because to be quite frank, the designated offload nurse program, when it's staffed, does work, and it does release our paramedics to the community. We know that. The metrics show us that it works. When it's not staffed is when the challenge happens. And up until recently, it wasn't staffed on a 24/7 basis at all the hospitals. And so that we're hoping that if the province releases extra funding, our hospital partners can support a staffing model that will increase the hours of operations within the ERs, if that helps.
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional questions? So this, both these reports were for information purposes only. Thank you for being here to share it with us. Okay. All right. The next item number 8, Council Committee Tracking List. Any questions?
Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, on the councillor tracking, committee tracking, if CAO Lockenbauer at a future date could address the first item, which is January 10th committee talking about staff to review urgent security concerns, and it's in the context of the 2023 budget. So I'm not quite sure, now that the 2023 budget is come and gone, what the extent of that request is anymore. and perhaps take a look at it and come back with whether that means ongoing, or maybe Commissioner Sweeney can comment, like, is it ongoing discussion of security, or is this something that's no longer on our plate? I just wanted to get some clarity, because the date too says 2023, 2024, so it's a bit uncertain.
So CAO Lochner, not Lochenbauer, will refer this back to the Security team.
Sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. It's certainly, we have had many conversations with our partners in the shelter system, including the delegate that brought this forward, Councillor Deutschman. So we're building those plans into it. My view is, I think it got addressed through a number of different processes, and these are ongoing conversations to ensure that safety continues to be the number one priority. So I haven't had an update from staff on the latest conversation with One Roof, so I'll have to get back to you on that particular piece, but I know they're ongoing.
And if you could just maybe look at that anticipated completion date with something that makes a little more sense.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Under other business, Councillor Deutschman and Bauer?
Yes, thank you, Chair Herb. So I just wanted to address and I sent an email earlier last week to you and Chair Redmond and CAO Lochner about the anti-racism advisory working group and the status of that. So and the October 2022 recommendations that came out of that group. So it wasn't clear to me. I know there's been some discussion about something coming at some point, and it may be soon, but I wanted to raise that as something I'm hoping we will hear about soon, perhaps in maybe the next few months. And I would like to have that added to the tracking list as an item so that it doesn't, I just feel that we haven't really addressed it, and there should be a continuum going here of the work that was done last term into the new term, and there seems to be quite a gap in time, and I'd hate to lose momentum that was started by the last term of council in this very important area and see it moving forward. So maybe if there's some comments or from someone to address the issue that I raise.
Councillor James, you have a comment?
Yeah, just supporting that because it's so important. And I'd also request that when the report comes back, that we be able to speak with either the co-conveners or someone from AREG as well, because I think in part of the collaboration effort, we need to be able as council to address that group and look at and discuss some of the recommendations that they've provided, as well as staff's response on this and thoughts. Thank you.
I saw Mr. Lochner shaking his head on adding it to the tracking list. Thank you, Councillor Deutschman. Is there any other business? Our next meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Liggett, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since we are in the committee to do with cultural events, I just want to give a shout out to our Fashion History Museum in Cambridge. They have a complete collection of Cher's clothings the designer was Bob Mackey. And in August, I believe it is, they are going to be doing a Sherryoke. So anybody who has a Cher singing voice out there, please apply.
I'll do a duet with you.
Okay, so our next meeting is May the 9th. We do want to move into a closed session now, so I need a mover and a seconder to move by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favor? Well, use your e-scribe, please. I'm in favor. Mine's gone again. And remember, it's also lunch. That's carried. I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Wolf. All those in favor? use your e-scribe.
So, Chair, when will we be reconvening then?
Well, 5 or 10 minutes till we get downstairs, and we're going to be doing
Close.
lunch and close together.
Oh, okay. Oh, lunch, and then when will we be starting up?
5-10 minutes, we'll be starting up.
We'll be starting in 5 or 10 minutes for close downstairs.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Adjourn is carried.
Sorry.
And it's carried.
Are we going to, if we're not done closed, are we going to come back at 2 o'clock as we have delegations, and then if we need to go back to close, go back to closed?
We can determine it in closed session.
We'll let's decide that when we're in closed. But
Oh, okay.